What if I told you that right now you might not exist? Or that every choice you've ever made was already decided before you were born? Welcome to the world of unsolvable paradoxes, where logic twists in on itself, reality glitches, and even the simplest questions have no answers. From Schrödinger's cat to time travel murders that erase your own existence, these brain puzzles will make you question everything, or lull you into the weirdest, most philosophical sleep of your life. Get cozy, and let's unravel paradoxes that no one can solve, if your mind can take it. The trolley problem, kill 1 to save 5. A trolley speeds down the track. Ahead, 5 people are tied up. You stand by a lever. If you pull it, the trolley switches tracks. Only 1 person is on that line. Do nothing, 5 die. Pull the lever, 1 dies. What do you do? It sounds simple. It never is. Utilitarianism says, pull the lever, maximize well-being, save the most lives. 1 life for 5? A good deal. But is it? Is it ever right to kill? Even to save more? Or does the act of killing make you a murderer? Now imagine this, same trolley, same 5 people, but instead of a lever you're on a footbridge. A large man stands beside you. If you push him onto the tracks, the trolley stops. He dies. 5 lives. Do you push? Most people won't. Why? It's the same numbers. 1 dies, 5 live. But now it's personal. You're not switching paths. You're pushing a man. It feels different, because it is. Philosophers call this moral intuition. It's gut over logic, emotion over numbers, and it gets murky fast. What makes the lever pull okay, but not the push? Both are acts, both lead to death, both save 5. Is it proximity? Effort? Intention? Some say it's about directness. The lever feels indirect, detached. Pushing feels immediate, personal. But if morality depends on distance, what does that say about ethics? Then there's the doctrine of double effect, an ancient idea. You're allowed to cause harm if harm isn't the goal, only a side effect. Pulling the lever isn't meant to kill the one. That's just what happens, but pushing the man, his death is the means. So, the former is moral, the latter, not so much. Or is this just a loophole? Now complicate it more. What if the 1 person is your mother, your child? Would you still pull the lever? What if the 5 are strangers, criminals, people who were going to die soon anyway? Would that change your answer? Does who lives matter more than how many? And what if the 1 person on the track wants to die? Would pulling the lever be a favor? Or suppose the 5 people lied on the tracks intentionally, protesting, or staging a viral video stunt. Does that change anything? These questions don't end. Because the trolley problem isn't about trains. It's about us. Our morals, our logic, our flaws. Some argue it's a thought experiment gone stale, too unrealistic, too black and white. But that's the point. Simplicity exposes hidden tension. We like to think we're moral, that we do the right thing. But the right thing is slippery. Autonomous cars face this dilemma. Every second, do they swerve to save a group, even if it means hitting one? Do they save the driver or the pedestrian? Suddenly the trolley isn't abstract. It's under your wheels. AI ethics, medical triage, military drone strikes. Every day systems decide who lives, and they do it with code. But someone wrote that code. Someone made that call. The trolley problem is not just a game, it's programming reality. Let's flip it again. What if doing nothing is also a choice? By not pulling the lever, a decision is still made. 5 die. Inaction has consequences. Are you still responsible? This is where deontology enters, from Kant. It says, morality is duty. Rules matter more than outcomes. Never use people as means to an end, even for the greater good. Under this lens, pulling the lever? Wrong. Pushing the man? Definitely wrong. Better to let fate unfold. But that's cold comfort for the 5. Maybe ethics isn't about rules or results. Maybe it's about character. Virtue ethics. Who do you become when you make that choice? Do you want to live as the one who sacrificed someone, even if it saved 5? The mind flips it over and over. Wouldn't it be better if no one had to die? Of course. But life isn't ideal, and sometimes there is no good answer, just the least awful one. Some say the real point is this: we are all on the tracks, every day. Choices kill, choices save, and most of the time, we don't even know we're choosing. So the trolley barrels toward the 5, your hand hovers over the lever, and in that moment your philosophy is no longer theory, it's reality, and someone is about to die. What do you do? The Sorites paradox. How many grains make a heap? You place a single grain of sand on the ground. No one calls it a heap. Add a second grain. Still not a heap. A third. A fourth. Nothing changes. It's still not a heap. But you keep going. At some point people start to say, it is. But when exactly does that happen? 1 grain isn't a heap. That's clear. But if adding just 1 grain never makes a difference, then you could keep adding grains forever and still never have a heap. Which is strange. Because at some point it obviously becomes 1. That's the paradox. The logic is simple. Remove 1 grain from a heap and it's still a heap. If that's always true, you can keep removing grains and it will never stop being a heap, even when there's just 1 left. Which, again, makes no sense. Something breaks along the way. The Sorites paradox shows how vague our words really are. Heap is not a mathematical term. It has no fixed number. It's a soft concept, fuzzy, it floats somewhere in language, but we treat it like a solid thing until it fails us. And it always does. It's not just about sand, it's about every vague word we use. Bald, rich, tall, old. How many hairs make someone bald? How much money makes someone rich? When does a person stop being young? When does almost become is? We don't know. We think we understand these things, but our understanding is approximate. We live in grey areas, but our logic prefers black and white. The Sorites paradox reveals the cracks between those 2 worlds. The words we rely on begin to dissolve. That's what makes it uncomfortable. We try to fix it. Some suggest exact cutoffs. A heap begins at 317 grains, or 412, but those numbers feel made up, arbitrary. You could say 318 and nothing would feel different. But the logic demands a line, even when none exists. So we invent one. Others try fuzzy logic. Instead of yes or no, we get degrees. This is 30% a heap, that is 85% a heap. Sounds scientific, feels safe. But does it reflect how we actually think? When you walk past a pile of sand, do you calculate percentages? You don't. Fuzzy logic helps machines, not people. It makes programs that can handle soft categories. But it doesn't solve the paradox. It only shifts it around. A new scale, same old uncertainty. The line is still blurred, just hidden in decimals. It doesn't feel more real. The Sorites paradox isn't here to be solved, it's here to show you something, that much of our thinking is built on vague words, and vague words don't behave like numbers. They stretch, bend, fade in and out, and we use them anyway, because we have to. It creeps into philosophy, into ethics, how cruel is too cruel, how much harm becomes wrong, into law. What's the speed limit really? How drunk is too drunk? Into politics. Who counts as rich? Who deserves help? The heap is everywhere, but never clearly defined. We rely on social agreement. We pretend the lines are real. We act as if they're solid, but they're not. They're negotiated, shifted over time. What was once bald is now shaved. What was once old is now 60 is the new 40. The heap moves. Some argue the paradox exposes the illusion of precision, that we crave certainty where there is none. We want clean borders even when reality is a blur. The Sorites paradox reminds us, some concepts don't break, they fade. And fading is harder to notice. You never see the moment the heap appears, you just look up and it's there. Like sunrise, like aging, like forgetting. It didn't happen in a single step, but somewhere along the line disappeared, and you never saw it go. So how many grains make a heap? No one knows. And maybe that's the point. The paradox of the self. Can the observer observe itself completely? You see everything through your eyes. You hear through your ears. You think, feel, and experience the world from inside your head. You are the observer, the one watching, the one aware. But can you ever turn that awareness inward and see the watcher? Try to look at yourself without a mirror, not your body, not your reflection, but yourself, the source of attention, the subject behind every thought. Can that subject become its own object? It doesn't seem possible. You can observe your thoughts, you can reflect on your memories, you can notice your feelings, but who is doing the noticing? And can that you be seen in the same way? Can the mind ever hold itself in full view? It tries and fails. This is the paradox of the self. The mind that wants to know itself completely becomes like a flashlight trying to illuminate itself, or a camera pointing at its own lens. It can get close, it can infer, but it can never fully arrive. The angle is always wrong. The moment you look inward, you divide, the observer and the observed, the thinker and the thought. But now, which one is really you? The one thinking, or the one noticing the thought? As you try to watch, something slips away. You're always one step behind. Meditation explores this space. It asks, who is thinking this thought? Who is feeling this emotion? And when you look closely, very closely, the I starts to dissolve. You see thoughts arise and pass, but the self behind them, it's nowhere to be found. Science tries too. Neuroscience maps the brain. Consciousness studies the mind. But no matter how deep we look, no single part holds the self. There's activity, pattern, process, but not a solid you hiding in the neurons. Just shadows. It feels like we are singular, a unified self, but maybe we're not. Maybe the self is a story, a construction, a useful illusion, like a center of gravity. It doesn't exist physically, but it explains things. It holds things together until you examine it. Some philosophers say the self is recursive. It loops, it reflects on itself, like a mirror facing another mirror, infinite regress. The self observing the self, observing the self. But does recursion reveal truth, or just complexity? Are we chasing echoes? Others say self-awareness is real but limited. You can see some of yourself, your habits, your emotions, your blind spots, but never all of it. There's always more hidden, not because it's deep, but because you are it, and you can't step outside. The paradox deepens. We build identity from memory, from roles, from names and beliefs. But who are you without memory, without context, without language? Strip all that away, and what's left? Something quiet, or nothing at all. Can the observer observe itself completely? Or is the act of observing always changing what is seen, like quantum particles altered by measurement? Maybe self-awarenessness is interference. You can look, but never neutrally. You change when watched, even by you. This creates a strange loop. You exist, you know you exist, but what you are is always slightly out of reach. You're the tool you use to measure, the lens you use to see, and the image is always distorted. Even if just a little. Some say this paradox is spiritual, that true self nonne requires surrender, letting go of the need to know, and in that letting go the watcher dissolves. What's left is awareness itself, not a self watching. Just watching. Pure presence. Others reject that. They say the self is knowable, piece by piece, through therapy, reflection, inquiry, that you can map your mind like a landscape and understand yourself with enough time and courage. Maybe they're right, but still something remains ungraspable, a blind spot built into awareness. The eye can see everything except itself. The self can know anything except what it is, fully, completely. That last step is missing. Maybe that's the point. Maybe mystery is part of being conscious, a feature, not a flaw. The self is not an object, it's a process, an unfolding, always present, always changing, always just out of reach. And maybe that's okay. The paradox of the Theseus person. Are you the same person over time? Imagine a ship. Every plank is replaced, one by one. The sails, the rudder, even the nails. Years later, not a single original part remains. Is it still the same ship? Now, imagine that ship is you. Your cells die and regenerate, your memories fade and warp, your body changes, your beliefs shift. Are you the same person you were 5 years ago, 10, as a child? Or is that person gone? And who are you now? This is the paradox of the Theseus person, based on the ship of Theseus, only this time it's not wood that's replaced, it's your flesh, your thoughts, your identity. You change slowly, invisibly but constantly, piece by piece. Biologically, you're not who you were. Most of your body's atoms are gone, recycled, replaced. Your brain has rewired itself countless times. And yet, you still say, that was me. You still claim your past like it's part of you. But is it? Maybe identity isn't about material, maybe it's memory, continuity, a story you tell yourself. But stories can lie, memory can be false. People forget entire years, traumas, lives. Does losing the memory mean losing the self? It's not so clear. Some say the self is a pattern, a psychological continuity. You are the arc, not the pieces. But even arcs can break. What happens after trauma? Brain injury? Dementia? Is someone still them if their mind no longer remembers? Or has the person ended? Now flip it. What if you recreated yourself perfectly, same body, same memories, a clone with your history. Would that be you? If so, could multiple versions of you exist? If not, what's missing from the copy? Where is the real you? The deeper you look, the more it dissolves. Identity starts to blur. Are you your body, your thoughts, your name, your choices? Strip any of it away and something still feels like you. But try to point at it, and it vanishes. You say I without question, but who is the I that says it? Today's version? Last year's? Next year's? Maybe the self is not a fixed object, but a moving flame, always flickering, always changing, still somehow one thing, and yet never the same. There's comfort in sameness, in continuity. But what if identity is an illusion, a trick of memory, a survival tool? If who you are is constantly rebuilt, then perhaps stability is just a story, a soft lie we live with, because we need to. Philosophy doesn't resolve this, it deepens it. Locke said identity is memory. Hume said it's fiction. Buddhism says the self is empty. Neuroscience agrees. No you exists in one place, just networks, patterns, processes, no fixed core. Still, you feel it, a presence, a thread running through time. When you see an old photo, you don't say, "That's someone else." You say, "That was me." Even when nothing of that person remains. Even when everything has changed. So, are you the same person you were? In some ways, yes. In others, no. It depends where you look. Physically? No. Psychologically? Maybe. Spiritually? That's harder to say. But here you are, still saying I. Maybe that's enough. The paradox of personal identity. If your memories are copied, is it still you? Imagine a machine. It scans your brain. Every memory, every emotion, every flicker of thought. It copies them perfectly. Then it uploads them into a new body. That body wakes up. It remembers your past. It knows your name. But is it you? It says it is. It remembers your childhood, your favorite song, the heartbreak that changed everything. It grieves the same losses, loves the same people. It even flinches at the same old fears. It feels like you. But something feels off, and you're still alive. Still in your original body. Watching this copy claim your life. From the outside it's identical, but from the inside, it isn't you experiencing it. So which one is the real person? Can both be? Or is one an imposter? This is the paradox of personal identity. It asks, if your memories can be duplicated, is identity just data? If so, you could exist in multiple places, in multiple bodies, but would each be you? Or would each be a you? And who gets to decide? Some say memory is identity, that you are the sum of your experiences, that continuity of thought makes you who you are. If that's true, then copying the mind should copy the self. But what if two identical minds wake up? Do you now exist in two places? Or is there only one true you? Is identity tied to your body, to your stream of consciousness? If the copy thinks it's you, and you think you're you, who's wrong? Or are both right? Or both wrong? Maybe identity isn't what we thought. Imagine if the original you dies after the transfer. The copy continues living, loving, growing. Friends talk to it, they believe it's you. It believes it's you. But the original is gone. Is death avoided or just disguised? Is that survival or replacement? Now take it further. What if someone copies your memories onto multiple bodies? Dozens, hundreds. Each one wakes up thinking it's you. Each one claims to be the original, but they can't all be you. So, who are they? Or were you never singular? The paradox cuts deep. It asks what makes you, you. Is it memory, soul, body, consciousness, pattern, perspective? If it's just memory, then copies should be valid. But our instincts resist that. Something feels missing. Something can't be cloned. Some argue that continuity matters. A copied memory isn't your memory, it's just a copy. Like printing a photograph, the image is the same, but the original moment is gone. Only the echo remains. And echoes don't live. But then, what are we? If memory fades, are we fading too? If brain damage erases your past, are you still the same person? What if you wake with no memory at all? Are you someone new? Someone else? Or just blank? The paradox has no clean answer, only haunting possibilities. Maybe identity isn't a thing. It's a process, a flow of experience, not a file to be copied, but a flame that can't be relit. Once it's gone, and nothing replaces it. Or maybe the copy is you, just in a new shell. And that's what matters, continuity of self, even if the body breaks. Maybe one day, that's how we'll live forever, through memory, through code. But will it still feel like us? So if your memories are copied, perfectly, completely, is it still you? Or just something that thinks it is? And is there even a difference? The paradox of consciousness. How can consciousness be aware of itself? You close your eyes. You sit in silence. Thoughts arise. You notice them. You observe the inner world unfolding. But then a question appears. What exactly is doing the observing? And how can it observe itself? Consciousness is always pointed outward or inward. It sees, it knows, it feels. But can it turn directly on itself? Not its contents, not its thoughts, but its own nature, the awareness behind everything. Can it be both subject and object? This is the paradox. To see something, you must stand apart from it. But how can you stand apart from the very thing that makes seeing possible? It's like a finger trying to touch itself, a knife trying to cut itself. Awareness turning inward disappears. Try it now. Look for the one who is looking. You'll find thoughts, feelings, sensations. But the watcher, the seer, it's always just out of reach. Like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. You are the mirror. Some say consciousness is self-revealing, that it doesn't need to look at itself because it is itself, like light that illuminates without being seen. You don't need to observe it, you only need to be it. But that answer feels like a riddle. Others believe it's recursive, consciousness aware of being conscious. A loop, a hall of mirrors, infinite self-referencing. But does that explain the feeling of I, or just describe its architecture? Are we just describing reflections? Science struggles here. It can measure brain activity, it can trace awareness to networks and signals, but the experience of consciousness, what it feels like to be aware, is untouched. The lights are on, but no one knows why or how. This is the hard problem of consciousness, explaining why there's something it's like to be you, not just neurons firing, but the warm, fluid flow of knowing, of presence. And when that knowing turns back on itself, things get strange. In deep meditation, the mind quiets, thoughts slow, and what remains is just awareness, empty, still, watching itself, not as a thing, but as space. Consciousness without content, a mirror with nothing in it, but it's still there. Some traditions say that's the core of self, not personality, not memory, but raw, silent awareness, the one thing that never changes. Always present, always here. It cannot be seen, but it is what sees. It is what says, I am. But philosophy resists that. It asks, if consciousness can't be examined, is it even real? Is it just a side effect of the brain? A byproduct of complexity? If it can't be located, touched, defined, does it exist at all? Or is it illusion? But illusions appear to someone. Dreams are dreamt by something. Even doubt requires a doubter. If consciousness is an illusion, it's the one illusion that includes everything, even the thought that it's not real. So how can consciousness be aware of itself? Maybe it can't. Maybe it can only reflect. Or maybe the question is wrong. Maybe awareness doesn't need to see itself, because in every act of seeing, it's already there, like the space between thoughts, like the silence beneath sound, always unnoticed, always necessary. You never really find it, you just fall into it. And once you do, the search ends. Because there's nothing left to search for. Brain in a vat, are you really experiencing reality? Imagine this. You're not in a body, you're not in a world. You are a brain, suspended in a vat, connected to a computer. That machine feeds you signals, perfectly simulated sounds, artificial light, the feeling of wind, warmth, pain. Your memories? Simulated. Your friends? Code. Your thoughts? Reactions to input. Your entire life, generated by algorithms. And if the illusion is flawless, would you even know? Could you ever tell the difference between reality and a convincing imitation? Would it even matter if you could? This is the brain in a vat thought experiment, a modern retelling of Descartes' evil demon. It asks one quiet but terrifying question. If all your experiences can be faked, then how do you know what's real? Every sound you hear, every object you touch, every word you read, all of it could be fed to your brain by wires. And if your brain believes it's real, then isn't that enough? Or is something essential lost when truth disappears? How do you measure realness? Try to disprove it. Try to prove you're not a brain in a vat. You can't. Any evidence you use, science, memory, logic, could be part of the illusion. You're trapped inside your own perception. Even doubt itself becomes suspect. You say, this feels real. But that's just more data, more input. The vat scenario doesn't need to be probable, it just needs to be possible. And once that door is open, you're never fully sure again. Something in you stays uneasy forever. Some say it doesn't matter, that experience is experience. Real or simulated, it still feels the same. If love warms you, if pain hurts, if beauty moves you, then what's the difference? The simulation becomes your world, and maybe that's enough. But others resist. They say truth matters. That being tricked is different than being alive. That if your memories are lies, then your life is too. Because the value of experience isn't just in feeling. It's in knowing it's real. This paradox isn't science fiction anymore. VR is improving. Neural interfaces are emerging. Soon simulations may feel indistinguishable from reality. A digital sunset, a synthetic voice, a fabricated embrace. If you can't tell the difference, have you already lost something, and worse? What if you don't care? What if you prefer the dream, a better life? curated and comfortable, no chaos, no pain, just sweet illusion. Would you stay plugged in? Or would you still choose the truth? Philosophers have wrestled with this for centuries. Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am," that even if you're deceived, something must exist to be deceived. But this only solves half the puzzle. Yes, there's a thinker, but what are you? A brain? A process? A puppet in someone else's game? The vat makes no claims about your origin, only your prison, and knowing you exist isn't the same as knowing what that means. You're real, but so is the question. So, are you really experiencing reality? Or are you dreaming in a machine? Is this world a lie? Is this screen a stage? Are these words part of the script? Or are they a message from outside, nudging you awake? The scariest part of the brain in a vat isn't the deception, it's the silence, the lack of answers, the endless loop of questioning, the possibility that you'll never know. Paradox of free will. How free are your choices if your brain follows physics? You make choices every day, what to eat, what to say, whether to stay or leave. You feel free, you feel like you're in control, like the future is open and you're the one steering. But pause for a moment, look closer. Every thought you have is caused by something. Every choice arises from neurons, chemicals, signals, reactions, and each of those follows laws. Not laws you choose, but the laws of physics. So how free are you really? This is the paradox of free will. The mind says, I decide, the body obeys. But beneath that, everything runs on mechanisms. Your brain is made of matter. That matter behaves predictably. Atoms don't improvise, molecules don't rebel. Your neurons fire because of prior states. Those prior states came from your past, and on, like falling dominoes. The pattern feels complex, but the cause is rigid. If everything has a cause, can anything be free? Determinism says no. It says every event is the result of previous events. Your choices, just the inevitable result of what came before. You didn't pick your parents, or your childhood, or your biology, yet all those things shape your desires, your fears, your personality. You feel like you're choosing, but you're following paths laid down long before you arrived. Is that freedom, or a well-dressed illusion? Even randomness doesn't help. If the universe has quantum uncertainty, that just makes things unpredictable, not free. If your brain acts randomly, that's not free will. It's noise, it's luck. You didn't choose it, you didn't control it. So if strict causality removes freedom and randomness doesn't add it, then where does that leave choice? Stuck between a rock and a soft place. Some philosophers embrace this. They say free will is an illusion, a story told after the fact. Your brain makes the decision before you even notice. Then you rationalize it. You feel like you chose. But the choosing already happened. Behind the curtain, without your input. You're not the author, just the narrator. Others push back. They say, freedom doesn't need to defy physics. It just means acting according to your nature. If you're not forced, not coerced, if your actions reflect your character, then you're free, even if your character was shaped by causes. But is that real choice, or just internal momentum? The question cuts deep, because it touches morality. If no one truly chooses, how can anyone be blamed, punished, forgiven? If a criminal couldn't have acted differently, is he still guilty? If kindness is pre-wired, is it still virtuous? What happens to responsibility when freedom fades? Neuroscience adds fuel. Experiments show decisions forming in the brain before subjects are conscious of them. The readiness potential. Your brain knows before you do. It acts. Then you notice. The mind is late to its own party. The driver isn't in the front seat. Still, we feel free. In the moment of choice, something real moves. We weigh, we hesitate, we commit. That experience is powerful, intimate. Maybe free will isn't about escaping causality, but participating in it. Not being outside the system, but acting within it. Consciously. But even that may be just another effect. So how free are your choices really? If your thoughts arise from physics, if your brain obeys cause and effect, if even your sense of self is shaped by forces beyond you, what's left? Maybe freedom isn't real. Or maybe it's something else entirely. Omnipotence paradox. Can an all-powerful being create a stone it cannot lift? Picture an all-powerful being, infinite in strength, limitless in will, a being that can do anything, no matter how large, how impossible. Now ask a simple question. Can it create a stone so heavy that even it cannot lift it? If yes, there's something it cannot do, lift the stone. If no, there's something it cannot do, create the stone. Either way, one power cancels another. So, is omnipotence even logically possible? This is the omnipotence paradox, a thought experiment wrapped in a riddle. It's not about stones, it's about contradiction, about whether infinite power is coherent at all. If a being can truly do anything, does that include the logically absurd? Can it make square circles, 2 + 2 = 5? Can it exist and not exist at once? Or does power stop where logic begins? Some say true omnipotence includes the ability to break logic, that a divine being isn't bound by consistency. It can make contradictions real, but that turns reason to dust. If anything can be true, then nothing matters. Meaning collapses. Even miracles need a framework to be called miracles. Others draw a line. They say omnipotence means being able to do anything that's possible. Not nonsense, not paradoxes. The stone question isn't a flaw in the being, it's a flaw in the question. Like asking if the number 3 is angry. It doesn't make sense in the first place. Still, the paradox lingers, because it pokes at boundaries, at what all-powerful really means. Is it just very powerful, or beyond power entirely? If an omnipotent being is bound by logic, then logic is more powerful than it. And if it's not bound, then chaos rules everything. Theologians wrestle with this too. Some say God can only act in ways that align with his nature. He can't lie or self-destruct or be unjust, not because he lacks power, but because he is the standard. His limits are self-defined, but are they limits nonetheless? Others abandon omnipotence altogether. They say perfection doesn't require infinite power, that true divinity might lie in wisdom, not force, in being rather than doing, that the paradox only exists if we demand the impossible from the idea of God. Maybe we've defined it wrong from the start. The paradox also touches language. Words like all, any, and everything feel simple, but they're slippery. Can everything include what is logically incoherent? If not, is it still everything? The question is semantic, but also existential. How we speak shapes how we imagine the infinite. In the end, the omnipotence paradox doesn't prove or disprove anything. It only reveals the tension between logic and belief, between the finite mind and infinite concepts. It shows that power, when stretched too far, folds in on itself. Too much strength becomes a weakness. So, Can an all-powerful being create a stone so heavy it cannot lift? Maybe the answer is no. Or maybe the real answer is, the question doesn't belong in this universe. The teletransportation paradox. If you teleport, are you still you? Imagine a machine. You step inside. It scans your entire body, atom by atom, cell by cell. Then it destroys you, vaporizes your physical form. But somewhere else, at the destination, your body is rebuilt. Same structure, same memories, same face. The new version opens its eyes and walks out smiling. It believes it's you. But is it? This is the teletransportation paradox, the tension between continuity and identity. If every part of you is perfectly recreated, is that enough? Is physical sameness identity? Is memory continuity identity? Or is there something else? Something that doesn't survive the transfer. Something unscannable, something lost. The machine says it copied you perfectly. But if you're destroyed in the process, was it a copy or a continuation? From the outside, there's no difference. The new you walks, talks, laughs just like the old you. Your friends wouldn't notice. But the original you is gone. So who's waking up on the other side? What if the machine malfunctioned and the original wasn't destroyed? Now there are two of you, both with identical memories, both believing they're real. But if you can be in two places at once, are either of you the original? Or is the real you just a label? We think of identity as a thread, a single line through time, but this paradox breaks the line in two. You don't continue. You're replaced with something indistinguishable, a twin with your mind, your emotions, your life, but not your consciousness. That stayed behind and died. Or so it seems. Maybe identity isn't what we thought. Maybe it's not the soul, not the body, not even the mind. Maybe you are a process, a pattern, a moment-to-moment unfolding. In that case, teleportation just continues the pattern, unbroken. Nothing essential is lost, except the illusion of permanence. Others reject this. They say what matters is continuity of consciousness, the unbroken stream of experience. If the lights go out, even briefly, something ends. If there's a gap between who you were and who appears next, then the thread has snapped. This makes teleportation a kind of death, clean, painless, hidden, but death nonetheless. And the person who appears after is a replacement, a perfect lie, and that lie believes it's you, so much that it never questions itself, which makes it harder to detect. Some say that's all we are, stories that keep themselves going. You feel like you're one continuous self, but your body changes, your memories change, your thoughts change. You die and are reborn in microseconds. So what's the difference if it happens all at once? Teleportation just condenses what already happens. Cells regenerate, memories fade. You are not the same person you were 5 years ago, but you still say, I. The only real difference is that the paradox makes the replacement visible. It turns the blur into a break. So, if you teleport, are you still you? If everything is copied perfectly, does it matter? Or is the you that asks the question already gone? Replaced by something that simply thinks it never was? The liar paradox. This sentence is false. Is it true or false? Read the sentence carefully. This sentence is false. Only 5 words, perfectly clear. But the moment you try to answer, logic begins to slip. If the sentence is true, then what it says must hold. But it says it's false, so it can't be true. And if it's false, then it isn't false, it's actually true. You've just stepped into a loop. This is the liar paradox, a self-referential puzzle that breaks the machinery of truth. It looks harmless, but it crashes systems. If this sentence is false, is true, then it's false. If it's false, then it's true. It doesn't land. It just spins. And there's no safe ground to stand on. Some call it a glitch in language, others a crack in logic itself. It exposes something fragile in the way we handle truth. Normally, a sentence is either true or false, not both, not neither. But here, the binary collapses. The system eats itself. It's like a snake swallowing its own tail. Truth wrapped around falsehood until the border disappears. You try to pin it down and it slips. No matter what answer you give, the sentence defies it. It becomes a mirror that reflects contradiction, a paradox with no bottom. Philosophers have tried to solve it. Some say the sentence is meaningless, a linguistic illusion. Others invent new systems of logic with more than two values, true, false, and undefined. But that only pushes the problem into new territory. It never really dies. The liar paradox isn't alone. There are cousins. The next sentence is true, the previous sentence is false, or everything I say is a lie. These loops don't resolve. They circle forever. And the more you chase them, the more they blur. Meaning becomes missed. In computer science, paradoxes like this cause real problems. Recursive loops, crashed programs, systems stuck trying to evaluate what can't be evaluated. The liar paradox doesn't just confuse, it breaks the rules the system depends on. Even machines can't decide. And yet, it's just a sentence. Just 5 words. But those 5 words reveal something profound. That truth isn't always neat. That language can fold back on itself. That some ideas defy resolution, not because they're unclear, but because they're too precise, too sharp for the tools we use. So, is the sentence true or false? The answer is yes and no, and both and neither. It doesn't fit into the box, it is the box, folded in half, collapsing inward, a question that unravels the very concept of answers. Not to confuse, but to reveal. Russell's paradox, the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. It begins with a simple idea. Imagine a set, not of apples or numbers or colors, but a set of sets. Some of these sets are ordinary, they might contain elements like numbers or letters. Some are more curious, they might contain other sets. And some go a step further, they contain themselves. A set of all sets that include themselves. Strange, but possible. Now imagine a different set, one that contains only the sets that do not contain themselves. It's precise, clean, but once you imagine it, once you define it, the question becomes impossible to ignore. Does this set contain itself? And from that question, everything starts to break. If it does contain itself, then it must follow its own rule. But its rule is to only include sets that do not contain themselves, which means it shouldn't contain itself. That's a contradiction. But if it doesn't contain itself, then it meets the criteria. It's a set that doesn't contain itself, which means it should be in the set. Another contradiction. The set can't consistently contain itself or exclude itself. Either answer leads to the other. The logic loops. The system breaks. You've created a sentence the universe refuses to settle, a definition so sharp it cuts itself in half. This is Russell's paradox. It's not just a philosophical puzzle, it shook the roots of mathematics. In the early 1900s, logicians believed they could build all of math from a solid foundation, Set theory, everything, numbers, equations, geometry, built from the basic concept of sets. But Russell's paradox exposed a crack, a small flaw in the logic that let contradiction leak in. If set theory allowed this paradox, then how many others might be hidden underneath? The entire structure became questionable. Russell's quiet question rippled through the mathematical world like an earthquake beneath a cathedral. It wasn't just a set. It was a warning. Some tried to solve it by limiting sets. You couldn't create just any set, you had to follow new rules. Type theory was introduced, levels of language that prevented self-represented. Later, the Zermelo-Fraenkel axioms became the standard. They carefully constructed boundaries that would avoid Russell's trap. Sets couldn't contain themselves. They had to follow a hierarchy. It worked. The paradox was boxed in, neutralized. But the cost was freedom. The elegance of pure set theory was gone. Logic had to protect itself from itself. Foundations were no longer natural, they were guarded, shaped by the fear of collapse. Still, the paradox whispers through every mirror. It's a warning about self-referencing, about the dangers of systems that include themselves. It appears in language, in logic, in computer science. It's the barber who shaves all men who do not shave themselves. It's the folder that holds all folders that don't hold themselves. It's the thought that thinks about itself and breaks. Russell's paradox is not just about sets. It's about the limits of knowledge, the boundaries of definitions. It shows us that some questions, though perfectly phrased, cannot be answered without unraveling the very system they belong to. So what do we do with this paradox? Do we ignore it, contain it, reframe it, or do we sit with it and listen because it tells us something important, that not every idea is safe, that some concepts, though they seem harmless, are recursive traps. When you define something too broadly, it can turn inward and devour itself. Russell's paradox asks a quiet, impossible question. What happens when a system includes everything, even itself? The answer is simple. It breaks. Not because it's flawed, but because no system can fully hold itself. Rellingh-Nansen paradox is the word heterological. Heterological. Some words describe themselves. Short is short. English is an English word. Polysyllabic has many syllables. These are autological. Words that possess the property they describe. Other words don't. Long is a short word. Silent is loud on the page. Green isn't green. These are heterological. They do not have the property they refer to. That seems simple enough. Every word belongs in one of those two categories. But then we reach a special word. A word that asks a question no system wants to answer. The word is heterological. And the question is heterological? That's when logic starts to shake. If heterological is heterological, then it does not describe itself, which means it is not heterological, it must be autological. But if it's autological, then it does describe itself, which means it is heterological after all. Either way, the label flips. One answer negates itself, the other affirms the opposite. You're trapped in a loop. The word becomes a mirror, reflecting back contradiction. It's not nonsense, it's fully grammatical. But something in the logic refuses to land. The system becomes unstable. Language, once firm and clear, starts to twist on itself, like a snake eating its tail. And suddenly, words don't behave the way we expect. This is the Grellin-Nelson paradox, named after two German logicians. It's a cousin of Russell's paradox, only this one lives in language instead of mathematics. It's built not on sets but on self-description. It takes the everyday structure of adjectives and turns it into a trap where classification collapses. Words become too self-awareness. And in that awareness, meaning implodes. You're not dealing with gibberish, you're dealing with a sentence that's too precise, too exact for the logical framework it's trapped in. It's a linguistic Mobius strip. No matter which side you walk, you're back where you started. And the twist is invisible. Some argue this paradox shows the limits of natural language, that human speech isn't built to handle self-representation cleanly. Others say it reveals the boundary between truth and grammar, between what can be said and what can be resolved. Still others point to paradox as a feature, not a flaw, a kind of pressure test for systems. When a word questions itself, and that question breaks the structure, it shows you the edge of the system's coherence. Grelling and Nelson weren't just playing with semantics. They found the linguistic version of a black hole, a word that collapses meaning inward, and it can't be untangled. So, is heterological hetological? There is no stable answer. If it is, it isn't. If it isn't, it is. It flickers between states. Logic doesn't resolve it. Language doesn't contain it. It just sits there, quiet, impossible, and perfectly phrased. A paradox not because it's broken, but because it's too precise for the world it inhabits. It reminds us that even the most ordinary structures, words, categories, labels, can fold back on themselves and vanish. All it takes is one question, one mirror, one word that dares to describe itself. And everything begins to loop. Barber paradox. The barber who shaves everyone who doesn't shave themselves. In a small village there is a barber, a man with a rule. He shaves all and only those men in the village who do not shave themselves. If you shave yourself, he doesn't shave you. If you don't shave yourself, he does. Simple, clean, logical. But then the question arrives, who shaves the barber? If the barber doesn't shave himself, then, by the rule, he must be shaved by the barber. But the barber is himself, and if he does shave himself, then, by the rule, he must not be shaved by the barber. Either way, the logic breaks. And that's the paradox. This isn't about shaving. It's about self-referencing and contradiction. The barber paradox is a linguistic bomb, harmless on the surface, devastating underneath. It uses a rule that applies to a group and then applies the group to itself. When a system references itself, strange things begin to happen. And when a rule is applied to its own maker, the edges of the rule dissolve. You get stuck in a feedback loop, a situation where any answer collapses the system that generated it. The question becomes more than unanswerable, it becomes unaskable within the bounds of logic. A closed loop without a key. The barber paradox was introduced by Bertrand Russell, the same mind behind Russell's set paradox. Like its mathematical cousin, it's meant to expose hidden flaws in logical systems, especially when those systems are built without boundaries. The problem comes from a rule trying to handle every possible case, including itself. When a rule includes itself in its own scope, you risk inconsistency. The barber is both inside and outside the group, both the shaver and the shaved. But no rule can handle that duality without collapsing. It's not a failure of reasoning, it's reasoning running into its own wall. A self-inflicted contradiction. To resolve the paradox, you must dismantle the system. Either the barber doesn't exist, or the rule is flawed. Maybe there is no such village, maybe no such barber could logically exist, or maybe the rule, he shaves all and only those who don't shave themselves, must be rewritten. You can't build clean logic on paradox. You must carve out the contradiction or restrict the system so it avoids self-reconciliation. That's what mathematics eventually did. It drew boundaries. It created type theory. Because once a system includes itself, it becomes vulnerable to these impossible loops. You can't shave the concept of shaving. But the paradox doesn't only live in logic. It exists in politics, identity, language, even ethics. Who judges the judges? Who governs the governors? Can a society regulate its own regulators? Can the mind fully comprehend itself? These are the echoes of the Barber paradox in different forms. The moment an entity applies its power or definition to itself, you risk collapse. The system becomes recursion, without a stopping point, turns order into contradiction. It's not that the barber can't be imagined. It's that the moment you ask who shaves him, the imagination dissolves, and the question erases itself. So, who shaves the barber? The answer is no one, or everyone, or the question can't be asked, not inside the system that created it, because the barber isn't just a man with a razor, he's a symbol of systems that eat themselves. And in the end, they always do. Curry's paradox. If this sentence is true, then Santa Claus exists. Read the sentence carefully. If this sentence is true, then Santa Claus exists. It sounds strange, almost absurd, but the logic beneath it is precise. It's a conditional statement, a self-referencing loop. It doesn't directly claim that Santa exists, it only says that if the sentence itself is true, then he does. At first glance, it seems harmless, like a quirky grammatical trick. But then the logic starts to unfold, and what it reveals is not magic or nonsense, but a quiet instability at the heart of truth itself. It's called Curry's paradox. Here is how it works. If the sentence is true, then what it says must also be true. That's how conditionals work. So, if the sentence is true, then Santa Claus exists. But that's exactly what the sentence claims. So, by assuming the sentence is true, you must conclude that Santa Claus exists. And because the logic holds, the sentence is true, so Santa Claus exists. Not because you've proven he exists, but because the sentence is structured in a way that forces the conclusion. Truth used as a trapdoor. Curry's paradox is dangerous because it doesn't use contradiction. It doesn't say this sentence is false like the liar paradox. It doesn't break the system by opposing itself. It breaks the system by cooperating with it. It plays by the rules and still ends in absurdity. It shows that in some logical systems, certain types of self-recreancy can allow you to prove anything, not because it's true, but because the structure is unguarded. If you accept the logic of implication and allow sentences to refer to themselves, you can derive the impossible. Even Santa Claus. Mathematicians and logicians take this seriously. If a logical system lets you prove anything, it becomes useless. If Santa Claus exists is derivable from structure alone, then so is anything else. You could prove that 2 + 2 = 5, that the moon is made of paper, that nothing exists. And once a system allows everything, it means nothing. Curry's paradox isn't about Santa, it's about fragility, about how delicate logical structures are, and how easy it is to slip a sentence inside itself, like a folded knife, and cut everything open from within. No contradiction, just collapse. To prevent this, modern logic introduces restrictions, type theories, formal hierarchies, systems that prevent self-recognition at critical levels. They block sentences from looping into themselves unchecked, because once that loop is allowed, the foundation shakes. Curry's paradox doesn't look like a monster, it's quiet, clean, but it has the power to destroy consistency from the inside out, not through falsehood, but through flawless reasoning applied to the wrong kind of sentence. A scalpel disguised as a thought. So, what do we make of the sentence? If this sentence is true, then Santa Claus exists. We smile at the absurdity, but underneath it lies a razor edge, a warning that even truth, if shaped wrong, can lead to illusion, that logic, if unguarded, can prove anything, that the structure of our knowledge is not just about what's true, but about what kinds of truth can safely exist without eating the system alive. Sometimes the problem isn't the claim, it's the way the sentence breathes. Berry paradox. The smallest number not nameable in under 10 words. Think about numbers. You can describe some in a few words, 1, 12, 420. Others take longer, the square root of the number of stars in the galaxy or the next prime number after 1,000,000. But now ask this. What is the smallest natural number that cannot be named in under 10 words? That sentence, right there, uses only 9 words, and yet it seems to describe exactly the number it says cannot be described in under 10. So, what just happened? A contradiction dressed as a sentence. This is the Berry paradox. It was first noted by G.G. Berry, a librarian, and later formalized by Bertrand Russell. It's not about numbers themselves, it's about how we describe them. The paradox comes from using language to describe things within limits, and then pointing out what can't be described under those same limits. If the number can't be named in fewer than 10 words, but this very description names it in fewer, then the limit has collapsed. The rule folds back on itself. It's not a trick, it's a rupture. Language becomes a loop. The Berry paradox lives in the space between meaning and measurement. It shows how meta-language, talking about talking, can pull the rug out from under itself. When you describe something using the rule about descriptions, strange things start to happen. It's like writing the shortest sentence that cannot be written in fewer than 10 words. The structure eats itself. You're not just pointing at something, you're folding language into language, and the recursion creates a paradox. Like a ladder with no bottom rung. It might seem like a joke or a word game, but the implications run deep. The paradox reveals how definitions based on constraints, like word count, simplicity, or descriptive clarity, can backfire. The system is trying to define something by what can't be said, and yet in doing so it says it. Like naming the unnameable by calling it the unnameable. The act of limitation ends up creating the very thing it was trying to exclude. This isn't a flaw in logic, it's a flaw in how we use logic with language. Precision becomes the problem. Mathematically, the Berry paradox has echoes in Gödel's incompleteness theorems. In any system powerful enough to describe arithmetic, there are true statements that cannot be proven within that system. Sentences that describe themselves, or worse, statements that describe their own unprovability. The Berry paradox doesn't require math to break down. It just needs a few words and a boundary, a soft rule wrapped in hard logic. And from that mix, contradiction arises. Not because the sentence is false, but because it's too true to live in the system that created it. It names itself into impossibility. So what is the smallest number not nameable in under 10 words? If you can describe it in fewer words, it's not the one. If you can't describe it at all, you'll never reach it. And if you try to describe it by saying it can't be described, then you've already broken the rule. The number vanishes the moment you try to name it. A paradox not of value, but of language, of limit, of logic twisting back on itself. The number exists only as a contradiction. Yablo's paradox. A paradox of infinite self-reference with no circularity. Imagine an infinite list of sentences. Each one says the same thing in a different way. All the sentences after this one are false. Sentence 1 points to all the others. Sentence 2 points to every sentence that follows it. Sentence 3 does the same, and so on. Each sentence doesn't refer to itself, but it refers to the rest. The loop never closes. There's no direct self-recordation, no circle, just an endless cascade of implication. But the contradiction still appears. This is Yablo's paradox, a paradox without a loop. It was introduced by Stephen Yablo in 1993 to show that self-representation is not required for paradox. Most famous paradoxes, like the liar paradox, rely on circular statements like, "This sentence is false." But Yablo built something subtler. Each sentence avoids talking about itself. Yet together they create a system that becomes impossible to satisfy. The chain stretches to infinity, and yet the contradiction arrives anyway, slowly, quietly, like a fuse with no flame, burning through logic itself. The collapse happens in the distance. Try to reason it out. Suppose the first sentence is true, then all sentences after it must be false, so sentence 2 is false. But if sentence 2 is false, that means not all the sentences after it are false. At least one must be true, but which one? If sentence 3 is true, then every sentence after it must be false, and the same reasoning applies again. It ripples forward endlessly. The further you chase the logic, the tighter it wraps around itself. Contradiction blooms across infinity. So you try the opposite. Maybe sentence 1 is false. That means not all the sentences after it are false, at least one is true. Let's say sentence 2 is true, then all the ones after sentence 2 must be false. But wait, sentence 3 would then be false, and if sentence 3 is false, then again not all following sentences are false. The paradox isn't in the structure of any one sentence. It's in the infinite alignment of them. You're not stuck in a loop. You're stuck in an infinite spiral. That it doesn't return, it just never settles. This is what makes Diablo's paradox so haunting. It breaks the rules without breaking the form. It's like watching dominoes fall in slow motion, each one causing the next to fall, but no loop to close it. No single contradiction, just the entire system denying its own coherence. A chain of dependencies that refuses to stabilize. The deeper you go, the more the logic unravels. It doesn't contradict at the center, it contradicts in the shadows. There's no core, only consequence. Philosophers and logicians see Diablo's paradox as a refinement, a sharpening of what paradox can be. It shows that inconsistency isn't just about self-reconcision. It's about structure, about implication, about how statements, when stretched across infinity, can create a kind of echo chamber where contradiction builds invisibly, slowly, with no one statement at fault. It's not about lies or truth, it's about the architecture of implication and what happens when that structure bends without breaking, until it breaks everywhere. So what can we learn from it? That paradox doesn't always need a spotlight, that some contradictions are not loud but quiet, not sharp but wide. Diablo's paradox doesn't shout like, "This sentence is false." It whispers through an infinite hallway, and in that whisper you realize something unsettling. That logic can fail not through error, but through elegance. Through an endless line of statements that seem perfectly valid until the whole thing collapses under the weight of its own perfection. A paradox with no center. Just the quiet sound of logic coming undone. Epimenides' paradox. A Cretan says, "All Cretans are liars." A man stands and speaks. He is a Cretan, born in Crete, speaking of his people. He says, simply, "All Cretans are liars." At first it seems like just another accusation, a blanket statement, a cultural judgment. But then the logic slips. If he is telling the truth, then, being a Cretan himself, he must be lying. And if he is lying, then not all Cretans are liars, which means he may be telling the truth. The statement eats itself. It is both false and true, neither and both. A loop hidden inside a single sentence. This is the Epimenides paradox, one of the oldest paradoxes in recorded history, named after the philosopher Epimenides, who reportedly made the statement in ancient Greece. It's a simple form of self-referencing, a claim that invalidates itself by including itself. But unlike the liar paradox, which directly states this sentence is false, this version adds a layer of context. It uses identity. Who is speaking to complicate what is said? A Cretan making a claim about Cretans. His truth unravels because it must pass through himself. The message is poisoned by its own voice. Try to evaluate it logically. Suppose the statement is true. Then every Cretan is a liar, including the one speaking. But if he's a liar, then his claim can't be trusted. It must be false. So, maybe the statement is false. But that would mean not all Cretans are liars. At least one must be honest. Possibly even Epimenides. But if he's honest, then his statement is true. And you're back at the beginning. You cycle through truth and falsehood endlessly. There's no fixed position, no final verdict. Just a sentence chasing its own tail. The paradox lies not in the content, but in the structure. It shows how statements can fold inward and destabilize themselves. It's not about lying, it's about reference. The moment a system includes itself in its judgment, it becomes fragile, tense, vulnerable to contradiction. The Epimenides paradox is a warning that even the simplest ideas, truth, identity, speech, can collapse under their own weight when used carelessly or when used precisely. A small loop, but a deep one. Some try to resolve it by pointing out context. Maybe Epimenides meant most Cretans, or maybe he was lying about lying, which makes the statement true again. But these are escapes, not solutions. The power of the paradox lies in its purity. It's minimal, elegant, just a few words, and yet it brings logic to a standstill. It exposes a flaw not in the speaker, but in the way we interpret self-referential claims. Truth turns unstable when it looks at itself. And this paradox echoes beyond language, into politics, identity, judgment. If someone says, "Everything I say is false," do we trust them? If a system says, "This rule applies to all rules," does it apply to itself? And what happens when a community defines itself using a statement that undermines its own identity? Can truth survive when the speaker erases themselves? So, what do we make of Epimenides and his claim? Is he lying? Is he telling the truth? The paradox doesn't let you answer, it only lets you feel the twist. The way language can trap itself, the way truth can fold, the way even a sentence, calmly spoken, can carry within it the seeds of collapse. A Cretan says, "All Cretans are liars," and logic holds its breath. Strengthened liar paradox. A self-referential twist on the liar paradox. It begins with a sentence, not just any sentence, but a familiar one. This sentence is false. It loops in on itself. If it's true, then it must be false, and if it's false, then it must be true. It's the classic liar paradox, an elegant little knot in language. But now, consider a twist, a subtle sharpening. Instead of saying the sentence is false, it now says, "This sentence is not true." The difference seems small, but something essential has shifted. The paradox has become stronger. This is the strengthened liar paradox, and unlike the original, it avoids easy exits. When a sentence says, "I am false," one could argue that perhaps it's just neither true nor false. Maybe it sits in some undefined space, but the strengthened version blocks that path. It doesn't claim to be false, it claims it is not true. And this, at least within classical logic, means it must either be false or in some undefined category. But if it's not true, then what it says is correct, so it must be true. But it just said it isn't. This paradox is cleaner, tighter. It avoids the loopholes of the original liar sentence by removing direct appeal to the label false. It simply denies its own truth status, but in doing so it creates a kind of vacuum. If it is true, it must be not true. If it is not true, it becomes true. The contradiction doesn't arise from clumsy wording or ambiguity, it arises from precision. The paradox tightens around itself with no slack, no room for escape. It becomes the contradiction it describes. Logicians and philosophers have tried to tame it. Some argue for a third truth value, something beyond true and false, a kind of logical grey zone. Others try to rebuild the foundations of truth theory altogether, hierarchies of language, levels of reference, sentences that cannot refer to themselves unless properly typed and categorized. These attempts help in some contexts, but the paradox remains, not just as a linguistic trick, but as a symptom of something deeper. That truth may not be as stable as we think. The strengthened liar paradox whispers something uncomfortable, that even in our most careful systems, contradiction can hide in plain sight, that language, when turned inward, becomes unpredictable, that self-recognition is not just a feature, it's a fault line. And once a sentence is allowed to speak about itself in the wrong way, it can shake the foundations beneath it. This isn't a glitch, it's a mirror pointed at truth, reflecting back distortion. A sentence that destroys itself as it speaks. So what is the truth value of this sentence is not true? Is it false? Is it undefined? Is it paradoxical? Every answer seems to reach for solid ground and sink. The sentence doesn't want resolution. It exists to reveal the edge of language, the place where logic ends not with error but with recursion, not with silence but with infinite repetition. Truth loops, meaning spirals, and the system breaks softly from within. Noah paradox. This sentence is not known to be true. A sentence stands quietly on the page. It says, this sentence is not known to be true. It's not loud. It doesn't claim to be false or to be unknowable. It simply says it is not known. You read it, you try to understand it, and in doing so you begin to know what it says, but then you stop, because something strange just happened. If you know what it says, and you agree with it, then you know that it is not known, which means you know a sentence that says it isn't known. This is the Noah paradox, a cousin of the liar paradox, but softer, more subtle. Instead of attacking the structure of truth, it challenges the boundaries of knowledge. It asks, what happens when a sentence talks about what is known and includes itself in that reflection? Can a sentence be true yet remain unknown? And if it becomes known, does it contradict itself in the moment it's understood? Awareness creates the contradiction. Try to accept the sentence as true. Then, what it says must be the case. It is not known to be true. But if it is true and you accept it, then you do know it, which means it is not the case that it is unknown, which makes it false. So now assume the sentence is false. That means it is known to be true, but that contradicts its own falsehood. You are stuck in a recursion of knowledge, a loop where knowing and not knowing overlap. What makes the Noah paradox different from others is its link to epistemic logic, the study of knowledge itself. It asks not what is true, but what is known to be true. And in that space, self-recognition becomes dangerous. A sentence that refers to its own epistemic status becomes like a hall of mirrors. You think you see the sentence, you think you know it, but every time you settle on understanding, the meaning shifts. You cannot know what claims not to be known. Philosophers have tried to resolve it. Some say it shows the limits of our epistemic systems, that we need to separate the language of knowledge from the things being known. Others propose knowledge hierarchies, levels of knowing, each isolated from the one before. Still others embrace the paradox, saying it reflects a real tension in how we think, that there are things which are true but cannot be known, and the moment we know them, they stop being what they were, like watching a dream vanish in daylight. There are echoes here of Gödel's incompleteness theorems, of truths that exist beyond proof, of systems that cannot contain all their own facts without contradiction. The Noah paradox is not just a sentence. It's a question about the boundary between understanding and unreachability, about how the act of knowing can alter the thing being known. Awareness bends the structure beneath it. So, what do we make of the sentence? This sentence is not known to be true. If we believe it, we undermine it. If we reject it, we affirm it. It does not demand belief or disbelief, it demands caution. It reminds us that knowledge is not just about facts, but about frames, about who is looking and when, and how knowing itself can be the thing that destabilizes what we know. You know the sentence. And in knowing it, it unknows itself. Grandfather paradox. What if you went back and killed your grandfather? Time travel always seems exciting until you start asking the wrong question. Imagine this. You build a machine, you step inside, you travel back in time to a date decades before you were born. You find a man, your grandfather, young, alive, vulnerable, and then you kill him. No hesitation, no mistake. It happens. But then a question arrives, quiet at first but loud in its implications. If your grandfather died before your parent was born, then how were you born? And if you were never born, who killed him? This is the grandfather paradox, one of the oldest and most famous thought experiments in time travel theory. It's not just a problem of cause and effect, it's a problem of self-cancellation. If you change the past in a way that prevents your own existence, then you lose the ability to go back and make that change. But if you didn't go back, then your grandfather lived. Then you were born. Then you did go back, and the loop begins, a closed circuit of contradiction, history spinning into itself. The paradox doesn't require murder. You could stop your parents from meeting. You could step on a butterfly that triggers a different future. The effect is the same. You erase the conditions that made your existence possible. But then you shouldn't exist. And if you don't exist, the past remains unchanged, which leads to your existence again. The logic loops endlessly, folding in on itself with every pass. It's not just time that's in conflict, it's identity, action, and memory. A ripple that drowns its source. Philosophers and physicists have tried to untangle it. Some invoke the consistency principle, the idea that the universe simply won't let you change the past. Any time travel must be self-consistent. You could go back in time, but only to fulfill the past, not alter it. If you try to kill your grandfather, something stops you. The gun jams, you miss. He survives. Because if he doesn't survive, the timeline collapses. Reality protects itself from paradox. Others propose the multiverse solution. You go back, you kill him, but the universe splits. One timeline ends with your grandfather dead and you never born, but another continues untouched. You return not to your past, but to a parallel one, a new reality that branches away from the one you knew. In this view, time is not a line but a tree. Each action creates a new limb. And in doing so, paradox dissolves. But so does the meaning of your original timeline. Then there's the radical view that time travel simply isn't possible, not because of technology, but because of logic. The grandfather paradox reveals something fundamental, that cause must follow effect. That time, as we understand it, must move forward, not because the universe demands it, but because contradiction follows if we move in reverse. This isn't a flaw in time travel fiction, it's a flaw in how we assume time is built. Maybe the past is sealed for a reason. The grandfather paradox haunts every story of temporal loops, every dream of changing history. It raises one of the simplest, most devastating questions. What if you were never meant to be there? And what happens when your presence in the past cancels the future that sent you back? It's not just about erasing yourself. It's about erasing the possibility of erasure. About being a cause that destroys its own condition. A snake that swallows its own tail and vanishes. So, What happens if you go back in time and kill your grandfather? You change everything, including the version of you who pulled the trigger. And maybe that version disappears before the shot is even fired. Bootstrap paradox. An object or information with no discernible origin. Imagine this. A time traveler steps into the past. In their hand, a book. They leave it behind, on a desk, in a drawer, in the hands of someone who will one day publish it. Decades pass, the book becomes famous. Years later, the time traveler is born, reads that very book and eventually carries it back in time, completing the loop. But then a question arises, subtle and disturbing. Who wrote the book? Where did it come from? This is the bootstrap paradox, a time loop with no clear beginning, an object, a piece of knowledge, a song, a tool, a sentence. Passed backward through time and preserved, generation after generation, only because it was passed backward in time. There is no original creation, no point of invention. The thing exists because it exists. It continues because it already did. It becomes its own cause, a perfect circular echo. Something from nothing. You can replace the book with anything. A violin sonata, a scientific discovery, a blueprint for a time machine. Suppose someone travels back and gives Einstein the theory of relativity. Before he ever thinks of it, he writes it down, publishes it, and inspires the same time traveler decades later. The theory survives. It influences history. But no one actually created it. It entered the timeline as a closed loop, a gift with no giver. At first it feels like a glitch, but it's worse. It's a stable glitch. The timeline remains intact. No contradictions, no universe-ending paradoxes. And yet, something is wrong. An effect exists with no true cause. A thing arises not from creation but from recursion. We are used to things having origins, but the bootstrap paradox quietly removes them. It offers an existence without birth. And that breaks something deeper than logic. Physicists acknowledge the possibility. In a universe where time travel is permitted, causality can loop, in closed time-like curves, solutions to Einstein's equations. Information can circulate endlessly. It's mathematically consistent. The past influences the future. The future creates the past. There's no contradiction, just emptiness at the core. The loop is closed but hollow. Philosophers call this a problem of ontology. If something exists only because it already existed, then what grounds it? What makes it real? Can knowledge survive without ever being discovered? Can a work of art endure without ever being created? Can anything hold meaning if it was never born from intention? Or are we just recycling echoes? There's something haunting about the bootstrap paradox. It feels like a cosmic sleight of hand, the universe pulling something from nowhere with a grin and no explanation. It forces you to question not just time but meaning. If origins don't matter, what does? If existence is possible without creation, then what separates truth from loop? What separates memory from invention? So, what happens when you hold something in your hands that was never made? A book, a song, a thought, passed through time like a baton, handed backward through generations until it lands in the past, ready to become the future, but never the present. An endless circle, with no center. Predestination paradox. Actions in the past caused by future events. A man receives a strange letter. It warns him of a disaster, something specific. A fire, a death, an accident. He rushes to stop it. He acts, and in doing so his choices trigger the very event he tried to prevent. He caused what he aimed to stop. And the letter? It was written by someone in the future. The cause follows the effect. the loop tightens. This is the predestination paradox. It occurs when the past is shaped by the future, not metaphorically, not psychologically, but causally. When time travel, or any influence from the future, creates an event in the past, and that event becomes the reason the future happened. There's no contradiction here. The timeline is consistent, but it's circular. The beginning is also the end. The future reaches backward to pull its own history into place, and no one ever steps outside the loop. Free will begins to fade. You're not just trapped in time, you are time. Everything you do has already been done. Everything that happens was always going to happen. You may think you're making a choice, but your choice is part of the cycle that made itself. Try to break it, and you only ensure it. Try to run, and you arrive where you were always meant to be. There's no paradox of logic, only one of existence. And it's deeper than it first appears. The classic example: a time traveler goes back to prevent a war, but their interference causes the war to begin. In trying to escape fate, they create it. The paradox isn't in whether they could or should, it's in the fact that they already did. The event exists not because it was meant to happen, but because it always happened. There's no origin, no beginning, just the loop. No story, just the cycle. Philosophers call this ontological determinism. Physicists call it causal consistency. It means that the timeline cannot contain contradictions, but it can contain loops, self-fulfilling events, effects that are also causes, a reality where everything is coherent but nothing is optional. In this structure, trying to prevent something can be exactly what causes it. You are the reason the thing you feared exists. The predestination paradox is not the same as fate. Fate implies a script, an external force guiding the story. This is different. It's more like a trap that rights itself as it closes. No one is forcing you, but no choice escapes the loop. Your future pulls the past into place, and your past locks the future in stone. Not destiny, just geometry. This paradox echoes through myth, literature, and physics. Oedipus fleeing a prophecy and walking straight into it. A soldier sent back in time who becomes his own grandfather. A message from the future that ensures its own delivery. These stories don't break logic. They bend time into a perfect curve. A story without a beginning. Only motion that never stops. So, what do you do with a life that cannot be undone? If your choices are already part of the timeline, does it matter what you choose? Maybe not. But maybe choice was never about changing the future. Maybe it was about becoming the person who was always going to make it happen. And that's not freedom, but it's something close to truth. Newcomb's paradox, a strange game of prediction and free will. You walk into a room, a table sits in front of you. On it are two boxes. Box A is transparent. Inside it, $1,000 in plain sight. Box B is sealed. You're told that it contains either $1 million or nothing. A powerful predictor, an entity known for being eerily accurate, has already made a prediction about what you'll choose. If it predicted you would take only box B, it placed the million inside. If it predicted you would take both boxes, it left box B empty. The choice is yours. Do you take both, or just box B? This is Newcomb's paradox. A thought experiment that throws a grenade into the divide between logic and intuition, between free will and prediction. On one hand, the situation is clear. Box B has already been filled, or not. That action is in the past. What you do now can't change it. So why not take both boxes? That way you get the $1,000 from box A and whatever's in box B, possibly the million. This is the strategy of dominance. More is always better. But then the predictor enters your mind. You're told it has never been wrong. Its predictions are based on deep analysis, possibly scanning your brain, your behavior, your soul. And if it knows you'll take both boxes, box B will be empty. If it knows you'll take only box B, it will have already placed the million there. So now the logic shifts. The only way to win big is to take only box B. Trust the prediction. Act as if your choice now somehow causes the past to unfold differently. Welcome to the edge of causality. The paradox is this: your reasoning depends on how you view time, knowledge, and agency. If the predictor is perfect, then the contents of box B depend on your current decision, which means you're not choosing based on a fixed past. You're participating in a loop where prediction becomes causation. But if you believe your decision is free and untethered from the past, then the predictor has no real power. You are just choosing. And the past is already set. So which logic wins? Philosophers have split into two camps. One boxers believe in the power of the predictor. They see decision-making as a holistic process that includes how your actions reflect your character and how that character was used to predict the future. They argue, if you act like someone who takes only box B, you'll get the million. Two-boxer twin paradox. One twin ages slower due to time dilation. Two twins, identical in birth, in age, in biology. But one boards a spaceship. She travels near the speed of light. The other stays on Earth. Decades pass. Depending on who's counting, the traveler returns. Her body is younger, her face smoother, her time slower. The earth-bound twin has aged, wrinkles, decay. Time moved forward, but not equally. One life stretched, the other condensed, the same beginning, but a different now. This is the twin paradox. At the heart of it is time dilation, a consequence of Einstein's theory of special relativity. The faster you move through space, the slower you move through time. Relative to someone else, it's not imagination, it's not illusion, it's physical. Clocks tick slower the faster they travel. Time itself bends. So if one twin travels near light speed and the other doesn't, their clocks will diverge. Their bodies will diverge. Their aging will diverge. The universe splits them by velocity. But then comes the paradox. From the traveler's perspective, she was at rest. It was the Earth, the stars, the universe that sped by. So shouldn't the earthbound twin have aged slower? Shouldn't she be younger? How can each twin see the other as the one who is moving, and both be right? Where does the symmetry break? The resolution lies in the journey itself. The traveling twin turns around, she accelerates, she decelerates, she changes frames of reference, while the earthbound twin remains in an inertial frame, stationary, steady. The traveler breaks that uniform motion. The paradox is not in the math, it's in how we think about movement. In special relativity, acceleration breaks symmetry, and in that break, the difference in time becomes real. One twin's clock truly ticks slower. This is not just theory, it has been measured. Atomic clocks flown on planes tick more slowly than their counterparts on the ground. GPS satellites must account for time dilation to remain accurate. The paradox is not just about twins. It's about how time, once thought to be fixed, universal, absolute, is instead fluid, relative, dependent on speed, dependent on gravity, dependent on perspective. There is no master clock in the sky. The twin paradox touches something deeper than physics. It touches the experience of time. We feel it as a river, steady, forward, shared, but it isn't. Two people can begin together, walk different paths, and reunite with different measures of time lived. And when they look at each other, they don't just see memories, they see asymmetry. Proof that time is not what it seems. A bond disrupted by velocity. So, One twin flies among the stars. She comes home to find her sister old. Decades of letters unread. Time lost not through choice but through motion. She didn't feel slower, but time passed differently for her. Her own heartbeat proved it, and now she sees what was always true, that even time can pull two lives apart. Fermi paradox. Where is everyone in this vast universe? The numbers don't lie. Hundreds of billions of stars in our galaxy alone, most with planets, many in the habitable zone, some older than our sun, which means statistically the universe should be teeming with life, civilizations, signals, lights, noise, and yet there is only silence. We look, we listen, nothing answers, nothing waves back. The universe stares at us like a mirror that doesn't reflect. This is the Fermi paradox. First posed by physicist Enrico Fermi in the 1950s, it starts with a simple question: where is everybody? If intelligent life is common, it should have appeared long before us. It should have spread, colonized, signaled, left something behind. But there are no Dyson spheres, no broadcasts, no ruins on Mars, no cosmic graffiti scribbled across the sky, just stars and questions, and the unbearable weight of being alone. There are many possible answers. Maybe we're early, the first spark in a quiet cosmos. Maybe others are out there, but too far, too quiet, or too different to detect. Maybe intelligent life tends to self-destruct before it reaches the stars. War, climate, collapse, a short burst of brilliance followed by silence. Civilizations like fireworks, gone before they can be seen. Maybe that silence is a warning. Some suggest a great filter, a barrier that life must pass. It could be behind us, the leap from single cells to conscious beings. If so, we are rare and lucky and precious. Or it could lie ahead, a threshold we haven't yet crossed, one that few or none survive. If that's true, then the silence isn't empty. It's the echo of extinction, the ghosts of those who came close. Others say they're here already, watching, waiting, silent by choice, following a prime directive of non-interference, or simply uninterested. Maybe we are ants to their eyes, or maybe we're quarantined, isolated from the galactic community until we're ready. Until we become something more than we are now. There's another possibility. Maybe we're looking wrong, searching with ears instead of eyes, expecting them to be like us, curious, carbon-based, broadcasting in radio waves. But what if they're silicon and silent? What if they speak in gravity or dark matter or time? What if they're not interested in contact? What if they passed through long ago and left, and we missed them by a billion years? Or maybe we really are alone, the only mind in the void, the first to ask, and the only one to wonder. A terrifying thought, and a sacred one. If true, then the responsibility is ours, to survive, to explore, to fill the silence with meaning, to be the voice in the darkness, because there may be no one else coming. The Fermi paradox isn't just about aliens, it's about expectation, probability versus experience. It's the tension between the vastness of the cosmos and the quietness of the sky. It forces us to look outward and then inward. Why do we seek others? To find company? To find answers? Or to find ourselves reflected in something greater? Something that proves we're not alone in wondering. So, where is everyone? Maybe they're gone. Maybe they're silent. Maybe they were never there. Or maybe the universe is waiting for us to become the answer to our own question. Ship of Theseus paradox. Is it the same ship after all? Parts are replaced. Imagine a ship. It sails for many years. With time, its parts begin to wear, One by one they are replaced, a broken plank, a rusted nail, a torn sail, until, eventually, every part of the ship has been swapped. Nothing of the original remains. No single piece is from the ship that first touched the sea. And yet, it looks the same. It sails the same. It carries the same name. Is it still the same ship? Or is it something else entirely? This is the Ship of Theseus paradox, an ancient thought experiment in identity and persistence. First told by Plutarch, the story asks, what makes something what it is? Is it the physical components, or the continuity through time? If you replace every part of a thing but never all at once, does the object change, or does it endure? Where is the line between transformation and replacement? How much can something shift before it becomes something new? Or was it always becoming? To complicate it further, imagine someone saved every discarded piece of the original ship, every old plank, every nail. And in a quiet harbor they rebuild it, exactly as it once was. Two ships now exist, one made of the original parts, one made of replacements. Which is the real ship of Theseus? The one that sailed continuously, evolving piece by piece, or the one reconstructed from its original materials? Which one holds the identity, and which is the imitation? This paradox touches more than ships. It reaches into the heart of personal identity. Your cells replace themselves constantly. Your memories shift. Your beliefs evolve. You are not the person you were 10 years ago, maybe not even yesterday, and yet you say, this is me. So what makes you, you? Is it your body, your mind, your story? Or is it the thread of continuity, the sense of being carried through time, even as the pieces change? Philosophers offer different answers. Some say identity lies in structure, the arrangement, the pattern, not in the parts themselves, but in how they're assembled. Others say identity is a narrative, a story told across time. As long as the story continues, the self persists. Still others believe identity is an illusion. There is no fixed thing beneath the change. Only motion, only becoming. A ship forever rebuilding itself. This paradox also echoes in technology. If we upload a mind, scan every neuron, every memory, and run it on a machine, is the consciousness preserved or copied? Is the digital version you or a clone? If your original self dies, does the pattern alone carry the truth of your being? Can something retain identity while losing substance? How much can be replaced before the soul disappears? So, is the ship of Theseus still the same ship? There is no clear answer, only shifting perspectives. What the paradox shows is that identity may not be about what something is, but about how it holds itself together. That continuity is less about parts and more about process. Less about stillness and more about survival through change. You are the ship, and the sea never stops moving. Delayed choice, quantum eraser, future choices affecting the past. At first it seems like an ordinary physics experiment. A beam of light, particles called photons, is fired at a screen with two slits. If you don't measure which slit each photon passes through, they behave like waves. They interfere with each other, leaving behind a pattern of light and dark. But if you do measure the path, if you observe which slit the photon went through, the pattern disappears. The photons behave like particles, as if the very act of observing collapses possibility into fact. But what if the choice to observe comes after the photon has passed? This is the delayed choice quantum eraser, a real and tested experiment that seems to bend time itself. The setup allows a photon to be detected, split and entangled with another photon sent in a different direction. One path leads to a detector that might record which slit the original photon went through. But the decision to preserve or erase that which path information can be made after the photon has already hit the screen. The interference pattern, or lack of it, appears to depend on that future choice, as if tomorrow rewrites yesterday. It sounds impossible. How can something that hasn't happened yet determine what already has? But the data says otherwise. When the which path information is erased, the interference pattern appears. When the information is preserved, the pattern is gone. The past behavior of the photon depends on what we do in the future. The photon, in some sense, does not decide what it is, wave or particle, until we make our choice later. The present chooses how the past unfolds. Physicists are careful here. They say nothing is actually traveling backward in time, no causal paradoxes. The outcomes are statistical. The full interference pattern only emerges after collecting and sorting massive amounts of data. But even so, the logic is unsettling. The photon acts as if it knows what we will choose, as if all possibilities remain suspended, unresolved, until we observe. As if reality itself waits for us to look before deciding what it was. Like memory forming in reverse. This isn't just philosophy, it's quantum mechanics, math, data, prediction, but it forces us to rethink what the past is. If what has already occurred can still be affected by what we choose to know, then when does reality become real? When does history stop being potential and become fact? Maybe time doesn't flow, maybe it's a network. Events connected not by direction, but by relationship, not before and after, but entangled moments across a space-time web. Maybe the past isn't behind us, maybe it's beside us. The delayed choice quantum eraser challenges the idea of objective past. It suggests that knowledge and measurement aren't passive, they sculpt the timeline itself. Reality is not a static film we watch play out, but something co-authored by observer and event, something that waits for its meaning until someone asks the right question, even if the question comes too late. So, what happens when the future reaches back and changes the past? In quantum mechanics, the past is not dead. It's not even fixed. It's waiting, and it might be listening. Zeno's paradoxes. Infinite steps prevent motion. You stand at the starting line, ahead, a finish line 10 meters away. You take a step, half the distance, 5 meters, then another. Half again, 2.5, again 1.25. With each move you cover half the remaining distance. Closer, always closer, but never quite there. Because no matter how small, there's always a bit more left to cross, a new halfway point, a new step, and so motion becomes impossible. This is Zeno's paradox of dichotomy. It's one of many posed by Zeno of Elea in ancient Greece, paradoxes designed not to confuse but to challenge our assumptions about space, time, and motion. At first glance, the argument seems absurd. We move all the time. But Zeno's logic is precise. To get anywhere, we must pass through an infinite number of divisions, and if each division takes time, even just a sliver, then wouldn't motion require infinite time as well? How can you finish crossing when you never finish halving? Then comes Achilles and the tortoise. Achilles, the fastest man alive, gives a tortoise a head start. He begins to run. But by the time Achilles reaches where the tortoise was, the tortoise has moved a little farther, and when Achilles reaches that new point, the tortoise has moved again. Over and over, the gap shrinks but never vanishes. Zeno's conclusion? Achilles never overtakes the tortoise. Speed becomes irrelevant when the steps are infinite. And then the arrow paradox. An arrow in flight, observed at a single moment in time, is not moving. It occupies a space. It is still. But if every moment is a freeze frame, and the arrow is still in each frame, then how does motion emerge? Zeno suggests it doesn't. Motion is an illusion, a trick of perception. Time, sliced into instants, becomes static, and from that stillness, nothing can move. Movement dissolves when the world is paused. Zeno's paradoxes are not meant to deny reality, but to expose its fractures, to show how reasoning can turn against experience, how math, logic, and observation don't always align. For centuries, philosophers and mathematicians wrestled with them. The resolution came not through denying infinity, but through understanding it. With calculus, we learned that an infinite series of shrinking steps can still have a finite sum. That infinite doesn't always mean unreachable, that some infinities add up to something small. Today we say, yes, there are infinite divisions, but the total distance and the total time remains finite. The paradox is solved. On paper. But something about it still lingers, a discomfort, a sense that time and space are not as intuitive as they seem, that even when resolved mathematically, the paradox leaves behind a philosophical residue. A quiet question: what does motion really mean? Zeno's paradoxes show how infinity lives in the everyday, in footsteps, in arrows, in races. They remind us that beneath the smooth surface of the world lies something granular, recursive, and strange, that the space between here and there can be divided endlessly, and yet we move. We always have. We always will, even if we never reach the end of the steps. Hilbert's hotel paradox: a fully occupied infinite hotel can still add guests. Imagine a hotel. It has an infinite number of rooms, stretching endlessly down an infinite hallway. Each room is numbered: room 1, room 2, room 3, room 4, on and on forever. And tonight the hotel is full. Every room is occupied, no vacancies, not a single bed unclaimed. You'd think that would be the end of it, that no more guests could check in. But then the front desk rings. A new traveler has arrived. And somehow the clerk smiles and says, "No problem at all." This is Hilbert's Hotel, a thought experiment proposed by mathematician David Hilbert. It was never meant to be built. It exists only in the realm of the infinite, a place where ordinary rules no longer apply. In a normal hotel, full means full. You cannot put more guests in rooms that are already taken. But infinity is not normal. It does not play by human definitions. Here, paradox is just another form of order, because in this hotel, full doesn't mean full. To make space for the new guest, the clerk simply shifts everyone. The person in room 1 moves to room 2, room 2 moves to room 3, room 3 moves to room 4, every guest moves one room down. And just like that, room 1 is empty. The new guest checks in. Nothing lost, no guest turned away. The hotel is still full, infinitely full. And yet, somehow, it has made room. Infinity always has room for more. Then imagine this. A bus pulls up outside. An infinite bus, every seat filled. A countably infinite line of travelers, each numbered: passenger 1, passenger 2, passenger 3, forever. Surely now the hotel must be overwhelmed. But again the clerk doesn't flinch. He asks each current guest to move from room N to room 2N. Room 1 goes to room 2, room 2 to room 4, room 3 to room 6. All the even-numbered rooms are now filled. But the odd-numbered rooms, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, are free. An infinite number of empty rooms suddenly appear, and the bus passengers file in, one by one. You can keep going, you can send infinite buses, each carrying infinite passengers, and Hilbert's Hotel will find a way. The mathematics becomes more complex, using functions to map pairs of numbers to unique room assignments. But the principle remains. Infinity can contain infinity. It can multiply itself and still remain unchanged. It is not a quantity, it is a concept, a structure that defies the limits we impose on reality. In Hilbert's Hotel, paradox is the welcome mat. The implications are profound. The paradox is not just about rooms, it's about our intuition. We live in a finite world. We understand fullness, boundaries, limits. But infinity erases those borders. It introduces a space where subtraction doesn't reduce, where doubling doesn't enlarge, and where being full doesn't mean being complete. Infinity is not a number that sits at the end of a line. It's the line itself, extending. And in its presence, logic becomes elastic. Hilbert's Hotel reveals how actual infinity behaves. Not potential infinity, the kind we imagine when counting upward without end, but completed infinity, where the whole infinite set is treated as a single entity. In this world, shifting guests forever isn't a problem. Creating infinite space out of nowhere doesn't feel magical. It's math. And yet, it feels like magic. Because our minds aren't built for infinity. We can describe it, but we cannot feel it. Infinity slips through the fingers of thought. But the paradox doesn't exist to confuse. It exists to teach. It reminds us that not all truths feel intuitive, that logic can outpace understanding. It trains the mind to walk into impossible spaces and sit with what cannot be pictured. In a way, Hilbert's Hotel is a lesson in humility. The universe may not be infinite in this way, but the ideas we use to approach it must be. Infinity, paradox, and contradiction aren't errors. They are mirrors. They show us what thought looks like at its very edge, and what reason whispers when it lets go of limits. So the hotel is full, yet always has room. It bends logic but never breaks it. It's not a contradiction. It's just what infinity looks like when you give it keys and a lobby. And somehow, there's always another guest on the way. Gabriel's horn paradox. Infinite surface area, finite volume. Imagine a trumpet that begins at a point and flares outward forever. Its mouth stretches infinitely into space. It gets wider but thinner, more and more hollow as it goes. This object is called Gabriel's horn, named after the angel who sounds the trumpet of eternity. It is built from a simple mathematical curve, y equals 1/x, rotated around the x-axis, starting from 1 and extending to infinity, a gentle shape. A single equation, but what it contains is a paradox so quiet, it seems holy. The horn has infinite surface area, yet it encloses only finite volume. Let that settle. You could fill Gabriel's horn with paint, and it would hold only a limited amount. You'd need just over 3 units of volume to do it. P cubic units, precisely. But once you try to paint the outside, you'll need an infinite supply. The inside can be filled, the outside can never be covered. It stretches outward forever, its walls growing taller and thinner, forever increasing in surface, but enclosing almost nothing. It's a container you can fill but never finish painting. This is the paradox, not a contradiction in logic, but a fracture in intuition. We expect things to scale together. Bigger surface means bigger volume. Longer means heavier, but Gabriel's horn breaks that link. It shows that infinity is not just large, it's strange. That something can grow endlessly without accumulating substance. That form can stretch without fullness. That a hollow shape can contain everything and still never end. The math checks out. The volume, when calculated with an integral, converges. It adds up. The curve drops fast enough that its area under the surface remains finite, but the surface area, when unwrapped, measured, and added, continues infinitely. That's because surface builds from both height and length, and even as height shrinks, length never stops. The edge keeps expanding, a skin that never ends. A body with no boundary. It seems impossible because we think in terms of physical things. Paint, steel, clay. If you told a sculptor to build Gabriel's horn, they would ask, "How do I build a thing I can fill but never coat?" It's not just impractical, it's unthinkable. But in the world of pure mathematics, it's not only possible, it's simple. This shape can be drawn with a pencil and rotated in the mind. It exists not in matter, but in structure, not in weight, but in concept. And yet the paradox lingers, because it touches something deeper. It reminds us how poorly we understand infinity. We treat it like a number, something big, something distant. But Gabriel's horn teaches us that infinity is behavior. It's not size, it's growth without limit. And in that space, strange things happen. Volume becomes finite, surface becomes endless. Our instinct, shaped by apples and oceans, fail. And we're left staring at something we can't hold, but can describe perfectly. Something that should be absurd, but philosophers have looked at Gabriel's horn and asked, can something like this exist in reality? Can you pour a finite amount of matter into an infinite form? Would the horn collapse under its own absurdity? Or is it only in mathematics, where paradox is permission, that it survives? Some say it reflects how the world might be, not in form, but in limitlessness, that space and time, stretched far enough, reveal these same illusions. Boundaries vanish, containers dissolve. Infinity wears many faces. This is one of them. Gabriel's horn isn't just a shape. It's a mirror. It shows us where mathematics breaks our sense of reality. It whispers, your instincts are useful but not infallible. You can fill the horn with logic, but your intuition will spill out the sides. It challenges the way we believe fullness must come with cost, that something infinite must be heavy. But the horn remains weightless, infinite in reach, finite in need. So what do you make of a trumpet you can fill but never paint? A paradox that expands forever yet holds only so much. Maybe it's not meant to be solved. Maybe it's meant to teach that not everything infinite is unreachable, that not everything finite is small, that sometimes the universe curls inward and outward at once, and we are left with a question that holds more than any answer. A trumpet that calls not with sound, but with silence. Banach-Tarski paradox, one ball split into two identical ones. Take a solid ball, a simple, perfect sphere. You hold it in your hand. It has a shape, a volume, a surface. It exists like any object should. Now imagine you cut this ball into pieces, not slices, not chunks, but strange, irregular shards defined by pure mathematics. Then, without stretching or adding anything, you reassemble those pieces into two balls, each identical to the original. Same size, same shape, same volume. You've just created something from nothing. This is the Banach-Tarski paradox, one of the strangest results in all of mathematics. It says that under the rules of pure set theory and the axioms of modern geometry, it is theoretically possible to take one sphere, cut it into a finite number of non-measurable pieces, and reconstruct two spheres of the same size as the first. No stretching, no compression, just rearrangement. The laws of arithmetic explode. 1 becomes 2 without cheating. This result feels impossible. It defies everything we know about matter and logic. You can't cut an apple in half and get 2 apples. You can't slice a stone into 5 pieces and rebuild it into a mountain. But that's the difference. Banach-Tarski isn't about apples. It isn't about physics. It's about mathematical objects, shapes that exist in abstraction, where volume isn't measured by weight or atoms but by set membership. The pieces created in this paradox aren't like puzzle pieces. They're so bizarre, so discontinuous, that they can't even be assigned a volume. They exist, but you can't measure them. The paradox relies on the axiom of choice, a foundational principle in set theory. It says, you can make a selection from each set in an infinite collection, even if there's no rule for how to choose. This axiom, harmless at first glance, becomes a tool of unbounded power. It allows for constructions that can't be visualized. It enables you to define sets that defy geometry. With it, you can create the unthinkable, or in this case, duplicate the unmakeable. It works only in three-dimensional space, not in two dimensions, not in the world of flat circles, only in a universe with enough room for rotation and distortion. And while it is mathematically sound, it cannot be physically real, because in the real world we're made of atoms. We are finite, discrete, and measurable. The Banach-Tarski pieces are not. They are purely non-physical. You can't see them, touch them, or build them. But in theory, they live. This raises unsettling questions. If math allows this, if it permits one to become two, what does it say about the relationship between mathematics and reality? Are we discovering truths or inventing them? Can logic exist without limitation, or does it eventually drift into magic? The Banach-Tarski paradox isn't a mistake. It's not a joke. It's a real result of accepted mathematical axioms, and that's what makes it terrifying. It doesn't break the rules, it is the rules. Physicists reject it as nonsense, not because it's wrong, but because it doesn't fit into a world with mass, energy, and laws. The pieces required by the paradox are too strange for the universe to permit. They require infinite precision, infinite resolution. The very idea of measurement crumbles in their presence, and yet, mathematically, they exist. They are proof that mathematics is bigger than the world it describes, an echo that outgrows its source. In a way, the paradox is beautiful. It shows that logic, when pushed, doesn't collapse. It unfolds, that even in a realm of precision, absurdity can rise from order, not as error, but as revelation. The Banach-Tarski paradox doesn't say you should build two balls from one. It says that, under certain rules, it's inevitable. That possibility itself contains contradiction, that within one lies the structure of two. So, can you cut a ball into pieces and rebuild two identical ones? Not in your hands, not in this world, but in the abstract world of infinite sets and perfect choice? Yeah, and that's the strangest part of all. Cantor's diagonal argument, more real numbers than natural ones. Divinity is not one thing, it comes in sizes. That's the first crack in the illusion. You might imagine all infinities as equal, just endlessly large. But in the late 19th century, Georg Cantor showed that some infinities are bigger than others. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, mathematically, quantifiably, with a method so elegant it shifted the shape of mathematics forever. It begins with counting, always with counting. The natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, are infinite, yes, but simple. You can list them, one after another, forever. They form what's called a countably infinite set. Now imagine the real numbers between 0 and 1, decimals, like 0.1, 0.123, 0.45192, and numbers that go on without repeating. There are infinitely many of them. You might think, can't we list those too? Can't we count them? Cantor proved you cannot. His method, called the diagonal argument, works like this. Suppose you tried to make a list of every real number between 0 and 1. You assign them, first number, second number, third number, and so on. You write each number as an infinite decimal. Then you begin to build a new number, one digit at a time. You take the first digit of the first number, the second digit of the second number, the third of the third, and so on. Then you change each digit. Maybe add 1, skip it 9s, or flip it in some way. What you get is a new number, and it's not on the list. Why not? because this new number differs from the first number in its first digit, from the second number in its second digit, from the third in its third digit, and so on. It cannot be equal to any number in the list because it disagrees with each one at least once. Yet it, too, is a real number between 0 and 1. You just built something that was supposed to be impossible. No matter how you list them, there will always be another number left out. One you didn't capture, one you missed. And that means the real numbers are uncountably infinite, a different magnitude of infinity, a larger infinity, one that cannot be tamed by enumeration, one that overflows any attempt to name it. Infinity, it turns out, has layers. This was shocking. Before Cantor, infinity was a philosophical idea, a gesture, a symbol for endless. He made it precise, dangerous, controversial. Some of his contemporaries rejected his ideas. They said his infinities were meaningless, that he was playing with ghosts. But the math held. The argument held. The truth was unavoidable. There are more real numbers than natural ones. More points between 0 and 1 than stars in the sky, than numbers in the universe, than moments in time. The real line is not just dense, it is uncountably rich. Between any two rational numbers lie infinitely many irrationals. Between every decimal you know lies an ocean of those you'll never find. And yet they're all real, all there, waiting, unnameable. Cantor's diagonal argument did more than count. It redefined size for the infinite. It gave birth to set theory, to transfinite numbers, to the continuum hypothesis. It marked the moment when mathematics stepped into a space beyond intuition, a space where logic builds shapes that the eye cannot see, where reason goes farther than imagination, where even infinity isn't infinite enough. So, are there more real numbers than natural numbers? Yeah, uncountably more. So many that they cannot be listed even in theory. So many that between any two of them lies another. Forever. An endless line. Too large to walk. Too vast to name. And yet, drawn with a single stroke on paper. Infinite lottery paradox. Can you fairly choose from infinity? Imagine a lottery with an infinite number of tickets. Each ticket labeled with a unique natural number, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. There is no last ticket, no upper limit, just a pure, unending sequence. And now imagine someone tells you that this lottery is fair, that each number has an equal chance of being chosen, not weighted, not biased, a perfect uniformity across infinity. The question is simple, the answer is not. Can such a lottery even exist? This is the infinite lottery paradox, a deep contradiction buried inside the concept of fairness and probability when infinity is involved. Because if you try to assign an equal, non-zero probability to each natural number, you'll find something strange. The total probability must still sum to 1, but there are infinitely many numbers, which means each one must be assigned a probability of 0, and yet one of them must be chosen. How can something with 0 chance be the actual result? Try to think about it another way. In a finite lottery of 10 tickets, each one has a 1 in 10 chance. The sum of those 10 probabilities is exactly 1. That's fair. That's clean. But in the infinite case, no matter how small the chance you assign, multiplying it by infinity either breaks the rules or makes no sense at all. Assigning a probability of 0 to each ticket means none can be drawn. Assigning any non-nano number means the total probability becomes infinite, a system where fairness mathematically collapses. So what does it mean to choose fairly from infinity? If no number is more likely than any other, then every number must be equally likely. But in doing that, you destroy the very structure of probability. You step into a world where uniformity becomes paradox, where the definition of fair fractures under the weight of the infinite. This isn't a flaw in logic, it's a symptom of infinite choice. One response is to give up on uniformity. Maybe we can choose from infinity, but not equally. Maybe some numbers are more likely, maybe the process is weighted by design or necessity. But that's not satisfying. It feels like giving up the principle. The whole beauty of randomness is in its neutrality. And if you can't preserve that in an infinite space, then perhaps something fundamental has failed. Perhaps fairness doesn't survive in the infinite. Some propose workarounds. They define non-standard probability spaces. They reframe choice as a process, like defining a method that will eventually land on a number without assigning fixed chances. Others bring in measure theory, where probability isn't about counting but about size. But even there, infinite discrete sets have zero measure. You can't paint one dot on an infinite canvas and say you covered anything. Infinity absorbs equality and leaves behind contradiction. What the infinite lottery paradox reveals is something quietly terrifying. That some choices can't be made fairly. Not because we don't want to, not because we're biased, but because the structure of reality or mathematics won't allow it. It forces us to reckon with the idea that randomness, so often our tool of fairness, breaks when stretched across the unending. In some games, the rules undo themselves. And maybe it's more than just a mathematical curiosity. Maybe it mirrors something real. In an infinite universe, can anything be truly fair? In an infinite life, can choices be evenly spread? If you try to choose from everything, do you end up choosing nothing at all? Or worse? Do you only think you're choosing? So, can you fairly choose from infinity? You can try. You can believe you have. But beneath the illusion of fairness, infinity waits. Without balance, without edge, without a single number more special than the rest. And yet, somehow, one of them will still be picked. The paradox of the lottery. Each ticket probably won't win, yet one does. A lottery is announced. 1 million tickets. One winner. You buy a ticket, so do a million others. You know the odds. 1 in a million. The probability you'll win is so small it's almost laughable. Rational thought whispers, you won't win. The numbers are against you. The same is true for everyone. Ticket 1 probably won't win. Ticket 2 probably won't win. Ticket 3 probably won't win. Go down the list, all the way to ticket 1 million, and you'll say the same thing. Yet somehow one of them does. This is the paradox of the lottery. It begins not in contradiction, but in the uneasy space between individual improbability and collective certainty. Every ticket is individually unlikely to win. The odds are stacked against each one. And yet, we are absolutely certain that one ticket will win, that someone must be chosen, that the drawing will end not in silence, but in a name. How can every outcome be improbable, but one must still occur? It's a subtle contradiction, a tension between logic and language. If I say of each ticket, this ticket will not win, I seem to be making reasonable statements. And yet if I say that of every ticket, I've said something false, because the set of individually likely truths produces a collectively impossible conclusion. A million reasonable statements, one inevitable lie. Probability, it seems, doesn't always add up intuitively. This paradox is ancient in structure, modern in disguise. It echoes through epistemology, the study of knowledge itself. If you rationally believe that each ticket won't win, are you irrational for denying that one must? How do we reconcile belief in each part with knowledge of the whole? Can you consistently believe something is almost certainly false when you also believe that something just like it must be true? How do we hold both thoughts in one mind? Some philosophers use this paradox to challenge ideas about rational belief. They ask, is it reasonable to believe each ticket will lose, even if that guarantees you believe something false? Should rationality demand accuracy in every piece, or coherence across the system? What do we do when the rules of logic and the rules of probability begin to blur? What do we believe when the unlikely becomes certain? Others frame it as a lesson in fallibility, that rational belief, though careful and structured, is not immune to contradiction, that we must accept some tension between what we expect and what must be. It's a reminder that belief is always incomplete, that to expect something doesn't make it true, and to doubt something doesn't make it false. Even impossibly low chances still happen. There are real-world echoes too, in courtrooms, in science, in finance. We say things are highly unlikely, we bet on statistics, we make decisions based on large numbers and small risks. But then, the black swan lands, the winning ticket is drawn, the outlier appears, and we are reminded that improbable does not mean impossible. The paradox lives in every stunned lottery winner's face. So what does this teach us? That truth is not always found in the parts, that reason sometimes steps on its own tail, that logic can lead us to believe things that together must be wrong, and that the world is large enough, strange enough, random enough to make space for what should almost never happen. And sometimes it happens. So, each ticket probably won't win. You can say that and be right. Say it 1,000,000 times. Be reasonable every time. And still, one ticket will win. One person will hold it in their hand and wonder how something so unlikely became the one thing. That had to happen. Galileo's paradox, same number of squares as natural numbers? Begin with the simplest thing we know, counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, onward without end. The natural numbers stretch into infinity, endless, ordered, exact. Now imagine a smaller set drawn from them, the perfect squares. 1, 4, 9, 16, 25. Each is a number multiplied by itself. They seem rare, spaced out. As we count higher, they become even less frequent. The difference between each square grows wider. Visually, mentally, they feel like just a thin slice of the full set. And yet, for every natural number n, there exists exactly one perfect square n2. For every square, there is exactly one natural number that generated it. You can pair them perfectly, 1 to 1, without missing or repeating. You can map them together infinitely, no square left unpaired, no number left behind. A whole matched perfectly with what appears to be only part of itself. And that's where the paradox begins. This is Galileo's paradox, quietly profound, born from a time when infinity was still more philosophical than mathematical. Galileo pointed out the unsettling observation that although the set of square numbers seems to be a shrinking minority among natural numbers, they can be matched, one by one, without remainder. It challenges the way we understand size. In the world of the finite, subsets are always smaller than the whole. A bag of apples cannot have as many apples as the orchard it came from. A room cannot hold more people than a city. But infinity does not follow those rules. In the infinite, a part can equal the whole. The subset can shadow its parent. What looks like less is mathematically just as large. The intuition that says squares are rare collapses against the logic that says, but they're all there, one per number. Infinity distorts the meaning of more and less. Galileo didn't have the language we now use to explain this. It wasn't until centuries later that Georg Cantor introduced the idea of cardinality, a mathematical way to measure the size of infinite sets. Two infinite sets are considered the same size if you compare their elements 1 to 1. By that standard, the natural numbers and the perfect squares share the same cardinality. They are both countably infinite. This doesn't mean that one is as dense as the other. It simply means there exists a complete, logical way to match them. That is all that's required. No need for closeness or spacing or intuitive fairness, just pairing. Infinity obeys only structure, not feeling, and in that structure, our expectations break down. The rules of reality bend quietly. What we think of as bigger becomes meaningless. Galileo's paradox is not a contradiction, it's a mirror. It reflects how our minds recoil at the true nature of the infinite. We can grasp it in numbers, but not in understanding. It shows us that intuition, the internal compass we use to measure the world, is built for the finite. It doesn't scale upward. It fails silently when faced with the endless. We see this in the way we react: disbelief, confusion, that subtle hesitation when reason tells us one thing and instinct whispers another. This paradox isn't about squares or numbers. It's about what happens when language, more, less, part, whole, tries to survive outside the world it was shaped in. A world where infinity is not a horizon, but a space that folds back on itself. And there things don't behave the way they should. So, are there more natural numbers than perfect squares, or are they the same size? The only honest answer in the language of infinity is yes, they are the same, but they are not equal in the way you expect. The paradox doesn't destroy logic, it expands it. It teaches us that not all truths feel true, that the map of reality stretches into spaces where size, order, and expectation collapse into silence. Galileo didn't resolve the paradox, he simply saw it, and in seeing it, he invited us into a deeper kind of thinking, one where the infinite reveals its quiet, impossible balance. Hypergame paradox, a game that includes all games not including themselves. Imagine a list of games: chess, checkers, cards, charades, games with clear rules and boundaries. Now imagine a new game, one step above the rest. A game called Hypergame. Its rule is simple. It consists of any game that does not include itself as a possible play. Hypergame can include chess, it can include soccer, it can include any game that isn't recursive, any game that isn't hypergame. But then the question turns inward, the loop begins. Should hypergame include itself? If it does, it violates its rule. It includes a game that includes itself. But if it doesn't include itself, then it fits the rule, and must include itself. Either way, the logic spirals inward like a snake trying to swallow its tail. The hypergame paradox is a variation of Russell's paradox and the Grelin-Nelson paradox, but instead of sets or adjectives, it lives in the world of play. It begins innocently with classification. It ends in recursion. If hypergame includes only games that do not include themselves, it must evaluate itself against its own rule. But no answer stabilizes. If you say it includes itself, you violate its premise. If you say it excludes itself, then it qualifies for inclusion. The contradiction isn't in complexity, it's in structure. You've built a rule that turns on its own logic, a mirror that reflects the mirror, a game that becomes unplayable the moment you understand how it's played. The rules collapse under the weight of their own coherence. It's a paradox of self-representment, the quiet destroyer of logical systems. Any system that is asked to evaluate itself from within risks contradiction. A rule that regulates all rules, including itself, becomes unstable. Like asking, can the referee give a red card to himself? Or, can the judge be judged by her own law? The framework turns in on itself and the edges begin to blur. Hypergame sounds like a game, but it's more than that. It's a logical trap wrapped in a playful disguise, a recursive loop pretending to be a set of rules, a contradiction that wears a smile. Mathematically, the hypergame paradox shows that even seemingly trivial classifications become dangerous when allowed to reflect back on themselves. The very act of defining what is allowed can undo the system if that definition tries to include itself. It warns us about limits in formal systems, about how structure, when stretched too far, snaps. You cannot define everything with one definition. You cannot create a rule that contains itself without risking contradiction. Hypergame is not broken. It is perfectly constructed to break logic by playing by the rules. And that's what makes it so powerful. The paradox whispers something unsettling about language and logic. That inclusion has consequences. That when a system turns its gaze inward, paradox emerges, not as an error, but as a property. Hypergame doesn't fail because of poor design. It fails because it succeeds too well. It plays the game of classification so honestly that it erases the line between player and game. You try to decide whether it fits its own definition, and in doing so you fall into the very loop it created. You've started playing, and now there's no way to win. So, does hypergame include itself? If yes, then no. If no, then yes. It folds logic into itself like an infinite knot. It cannot be resolved because it is the resolution that breaks the question. It's a game that explodes on contact with itself. A riddle that isn't meant to be solved, only understood as unsolvable. The kind of paradox that doesn't ask for answers, only silence, and then reflection. The game begins the moment you ask, "Is this a game I can play?" and ends when you realize you already are. Two envelopes paradox. Should you always switch? You are given two sealed envelopes. You're told one contains twice as much money as the other. You pick one at random. You don't open it, you just hold it. Then comes the offer. Do you want to switch? You hesitate, you reason. Suppose the envelope you hold has amount X. Then the other envelope could contain either 1/2 X or 2X. If each is equally likely, then the expected value of switching is 1/2 X plus 1/2 X plus 1.25 X, which is more than what you hold now, so you should switch. But here's the trap. This logic applies no matter which envelope you pick, which means you should always switch. And if you do, you'll just keep switching forever. This is the two envelopes paradox, a quiet, unnerving puzzle in probability theory and decision-making. It takes the form of a simple choice, but under the surface it warps logic into a loop. If switching always increases your expected gain, then you should never stop switching. But that can't be right, because the envelopes are fixed. One contains a certain amount, the other is either half or double that amount. There's no infinite gain to be made, and yet the math seems to promise more each time. You feel the pull of the numbers, even as your intuition screams that something's gone wrong. The reasoning rewards you with contradiction. The core of the paradox lies in expectation, the average value you'd expect if you repeated the process endlessly. But in the real world, you make the choice only once. You don't get to open infinite envelopes. You don't get to switch forever. The expected value is built on shaky ground, assuming each envelope is equally likely to be the larger. But how can that be true if you already chose one? If the possible values are unbounded, the math breaks. The paradox whispers, more is always possible. But it ignores the fact that at some point probability becomes undefined without a solid distribution behind it. The logic spirals without a floor to stand on. Some argue the paradox disappears when you introduce limits, a cap on how much the envelopes can contain, or a prior distribution of possible amounts, something that roots the expected value in real probabilities. Others say the problem is in using X as a placeholder for both the smaller and the larger amount, that when you say the envelope contains X, you don't know which X you mean, half, or double. The variable shifts, meaning mid-equation. The result is a kind of mathematical illusion, a sleight of hand in symbols that feels like insight but leads only to confusion. A trap hidden in algebra's clothes. But the deeper paradox isn't just mathematical, it's philosophical. It's about how we make choices under uncertainty. It challenges our instinct to chase the better outcome, even when the reasoning becomes circular. It shows how the promise of gain can distort logic, how expectation can lure us into endless indecision. Should you switch? Maybe. But the fact that you can always justify switching, that's the real paradox. Because no matter what you do, the numbers say you could have done better. And so you're never really satisfied. So, should you switch envelopes? The paradox says yes, then yes again, and again. But reality says stop, think, open the envelope, accept the answer. Because some questions aren't meant to be repeated. They're meant to show you how fragile reasoning can be, and how even in a game with just two choices, you can lose yourself in the illusion of more. Unexpected hanging paradox, a surprise execution that isn't a surprise. A prisoner is told he will be executed at noon on one weekday next week, but the exact day will be a surprise. He won't know until the executioner arrives. The prisoner thinks it through. If he hasn't been hanged by Thursday, then Friday is the only day left. But if he knows that, then Friday can't be a surprise, so it can't be Friday, cross it off. Now, if he hasn't been hanged by Wednesday, then Thursday must be the day, but he would expect it. So it can't be Thursday either. Cross that off too. One by one he eliminates each possible day, until no surprise is possible. And so he relaxes. He believes the hanging will never happen. Then, one morning, perhaps Wednesday, the guards come for him, and he is truly surprised. This is the unexpected hanging paradox, a puzzle that twists around the very structure of knowledge and expectation. The prisoner's reasoning is impeccable, yet somehow wrong. He believes he has outsmarted the executioner, that by thinking through every possibility he has broken the loop. But the loop is tighter than he realizes, because in predicting the surprise he destroys its possibility, and in doing so opens the door for it to return. The execution can still occur, and when it does, his disbelief ensures it remains unexpected. The paradox isn't in the hanging. It's in the logic that collapses in on itself. Philosophers have debated this puzzle for decades. Is the executioner lying? Is the paradox a trick of semantics? Some argue that the word surprise is too slippery to anchor a logical conclusion. Others say the prisoner makes an error in assuming his own knowledge is complete and reliable, that by trying to outsmart the situation he traps himself in a paradox of overthinking. The executioner doesn't need to lie, he only needs to understand the limits of belief, and the belief that the future can be reasoned into certainty. There's a deeper discomfort here. The paradox forces us to question the boundary between what we know and what we think we know. The prisoner builds a fortress of logic, carefully eliminating each day, brick by brick. But logic isn't always strong enough to predict experience. The surprise doesn't fail just because it's predicted. It fails because it's predicted, and then returns through the crack that logic couldn't seal. Knowledge collapses under its own assumptions. Some see this as a commentary on self-recognition, the same kind of loop found in the liar paradox or Russell's paradox. The prisoner's prediction includes himself. His reasoning affects the thing he's reasoning about. He assumes the system will behave independently of his thoughts, when in fact his thoughts are part of the system. And once that feedback loop is in place, certainty becomes impossible. Prediction collapses under its own weight. The moment he thinks, "Now I know," is the moment he does, and that's when the trap springs. So, Can an execution be both planned and a surprise? Can logic both eliminate and invite uncertainty? The paradox says yes. The prisoner is right and wrong at the same time. His death is certain, but the moment it comes, it still surprises him. Because the more you try to predict the world, the more the world slips out of your grasp. The paradox doesn't punish the prisoner for thinking. It punishes him for believing thinking was enough. Sleeping Beauty paradox: probabilities and memory loss. Sleeping Beauty is part of an experiment. On Sunday, she is told a fair coin will be flipped. If it lands heads, she will be awakened on Monday only, then put back to sleep, and the experiment ends. If it lands tails, she will be awakened on Monday and Tuesday, but her memory will be erased between awakenings. Each time she wakes, she won't know what day it is, or how many times she's already been woken when she opens her eyes. Awake, confused, uncertain. She is asked, "What is the probability that the coin landed heads?" There are two answers, and both seem right, which means something is wrong. If you believe in simple conditioning, the probability should still be 1/2. The coin was fair, and nothing that happened after the flip should change that. But if you look at the structure of the experiment, you realize something strange. You're more likely to wake up if the coin landed tails, because it leads to 2 awakenings instead of 1. From Beauty's perspective, she finds herself in a moment that's more likely to exist under tails than heads, so she might reason the answer is 1/3 for heads, 2/3 for tails. Because for every 3 awakenings that happen on average, only 1 came from heads. Probability begins to drift from reality. This is the Sleeping Beauty paradox, a quietly disorienting problem in probability, self-location, and memory. It doesn't involve contradiction, it involves perspective. 2 logical systems, each internally consistent, come to 2 different conclusions. The halfer view focuses on the coin. It was fair, it hasn't been reflipped, so the probability is 1/2. The thirder view focuses on the awakening. If you find yourself awake, that awakening is twice as likely under tails, so the odds shift. The paradox lives in this tension between objective chance and subjective position, between what happened and what you experience. Philosophers have argued endlessly. Some say probability must be rooted in evidence, and that each awakening should update belief. Others say that repetition doesn't affect the past, and you shouldn't revise based on how often you're asked. The puzzle touches not just on logic, but on consciousness. What counts as a copy of experience? Does forgetting change probability? Is waking twice the same as being 2 people? The Sleeping Beauty paradox doesn't break logic. It shows its fragility when applied to subjective, fragmented minds. It's not about the coin. It's about the self. This paradox whispers through fields beyond philosophy, in cosmology, in multiverse theories, in thought experiments involving duplication and memory loss. If you wake in a world that's more likely under one branch of possibility, should you believe you're in that branch, even if the original coin was fair? It becomes a question of self-location in a world that forks quietly behind the scenes. A problem of being, not just counting. So, what should Beauty believe when she wakes? That the coin was fair and nothing's changed? Or that the structure of the experiment demands she lean toward tails? The answer you choose reveals your philosophy of belief, your theory of identity, your willingness to treat uncertainty as personal, because in the end, the coin landed once, but she woke twice. And in that gap, probability no longer feels like math. It feels like a riddle whispered to a self that is no longer sure which moment it belongs to. Maxwell's demon. Can a tiny creature defy the second law of thermodynamics? Picture a box filled with gas. Chaotic molecules bouncing in every direction. Now divide that box in half, with a tiny trapdoor between the two chambers. Enter the demon, not supernatural, not evil, just small, fast, and impossibly clever. It watches each molecule, every vibration, every flicker of energy, and when a fast molecule approaches from the left, it opens the door, letting it pass into the right chamber. If a slow one comes from the right, it opens again, back into the left. Slowly, one side fills with heat, the other with cold, without using any energy, without lifting a finger. The system becomes more ordered, one side hot, the other cool. Entropy has decreased. The second law of thermodynamics, the pillar that says energy disperses and order decays, has just been challenged by a being no larger than a molecule, a being whose only tool is information. This is Maxwell's demon, a thought experiment proposed by James Clerk Maxwell in 1867 to test the limits of thermodynamics. The second law tells us entropy must always increase, or at least stay constant, in a closed system. It is the reason time moves forward, why heat spreads, why disorder rises. But the demon violates none of the rules explicitly. It uses no work, burns no fuel, and creates no apparent heat. It just opens and closes a door. Yet the result is astonishing. The demon extracts usable energy simply by knowing which molecules are fast and which are slow. It converts chaos into order, temperature into imbalance. A refrigerator that runs on nothing, a heat engine that breaks no law, yet wins every time. The demon doesn't build a machine, it becomes one. And the universe's most reliable law seems to blink until you start counting what the demon knows. That's where the paradox deepens. Over the decades, physicists began to realize the trick wasn't in the demon's actions, but in its memory. To sort the molecules, it has to observe. To observe, it has to record. To record, it needs storage. But eventually that storage fills up, and to keep going, the demon must erase. Erasing information, it turns out, is not free. According to Landauer's principle, every bit deleted costs energy. Deleting knowledge releases heat. It raises entropy, and so the universe catches up. The demon doesn't break the second law. It just delays the payment. What seemed like free order was only borrowed. The interest was building all along. And entropy is not something you can cheat forever. In this way, Maxwell's demon became more than a paradox. It became a doorway into the nature of information itself. It showed that knowledge is physical, that measurement, memory, and choice aren't just abstract ideas, but events with thermodynamic weight. The demon's insight sparked new branches of physics, information theory, statistical mechanics, quantum computation. It linked thought to temperature, memory to heat. It taught us that even the smallest acts of awareness come with a cost. A universe where knowing isn't neutral, where even watching changes the world, because seeing isn't free. So, can a tiny creature defy the second law of thermodynamics? No, but it can teach us how close you can get. It can remind us that the rules of reality don't always shatter when pressed. They bend, twist, yield just enough to show us what lies beneath. The demon never escaped the law. It just pointed at its edge and smiled. Olber's paradox. Why is the night sky dark if the universe is infinite? Step outside on a clear night. Look up. The stars blink through the silence, scattered, sparse. Most of the sky is dark, immense stretches of black between distant points of light. But then a question begins to form, soft at first, then louder. If the universe is infinite, filled evenly with stars, why is the sky not ablaze with light? Why is there darkness at all? In an infinite universe, every line of sight should eventually land on a star. The night sky should be as bright as the surface of the sun. No shadows, no black, just a dome of endless flame. Yet what we see is mostly void. A star here, a galaxy there, but overwhelming silence in between. Not just quiet, but darkness itself. This is Olbers' paradox, first clearly framed by the German astronomer Heinrich Wilhelm Olbers in 1823. And it doesn't question astronomy, it questions the very structure of existence. Because darkness itself becomes the contradiction. The paradox begins with assumptions that once seemed reasonable. Imagine a static, eternal universe, one that stretches forever in all directions, and imagine stars distributed evenly throughout that space. Then ask, what would you see? Every direction your eyes look, there should be a star, perhaps not close, but bright enough to matter. Their light would pile up layer upon layer until the sky glowed with a constant brilliance, not because of any single star, but because of the sum. Distance dims individual light, but in an infinite universe, the number of stars should overwhelm that dimming. Darkness under these conditions shouldn't exist, and yet it surrounds us. The void is not absence, it is a question. The solution comes not from philosophy, but from physics and from time. The universe is not eternal. It had a beginning, a moment, roughly 13.8 billion years ago, when space and time exploded into being. That moment limits how far light can travel. We can only see as far as light has had time to reach us. Anything farther is invisible, not because it's too faint, but because its light hasn't arrived yet. The observable universe is finite, even if the cosmos beyond is not. And most stars? They're hidden, not by distance, but by history. They haven't had enough time to speak, or they've already gone dark. The night sky is not empty, it is unborn. And there's another reason. The universe is expanding. Space itself stretches, and as it does, light stretches with it. The glow from ancient stars, from the earliest galaxies, is redshifted beyond visible sight, moved into microwaves and radio waves. What we would once have seen as light now flickers in cold, faint hums. This is why the cosmic microwave background, the afterglow of the Big Bang, comes not as brilliance, but as a soft whisper across the sky. The universe doesn't shine with ancient light. It glows with memory. Darkness is a form of delay. So Olbers' paradox is not a failure of logic. It is a doorway, a way of asking something deep. Why don't we drown in light? The answer lies in the limits of time, the physics of light, the expansion of space, and the finite age of everything we know. The night sky is dark not because the universe is empty, but because it is young. The stars haven't had long enough. The light hasn't traveled far enough. Infinity exists, but we don't yet see all of it, and maybe we never will. The darkness we see is not the absence of stars. It's the silence of light, still on its way. EPR paradox. Spooky action at a distance? Two particles are created together, born from the same event. They spin away in opposite directions across space. Years pass, light years pass, but something binds them. Not a string, not a signal. Something deeper. Entanglement. You measure one particle's spin, and instantly you know the spin of the other. Doesn't matter how far apart they are, a galaxy away. Still true. The result is always opposite, perfectly correlated. No communication, no delay, no time for information to travel, just instant connection. This is the EPR paradox, proposed by Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen in 1935. It wasn't meant to celebrate quantum mechanics, it was meant to challenge it, to expose a flaw, to say, this can't be how the universe really works. But the universe didn't flinch. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. To him, the idea that one particle could influence another across space without a signal was absurd. He believed in local realism, The idea that physical properties exist before they are measured, and that nothing can affect something else faster than the speed of light. So if quantum mechanics says entangled particles can determine each other's states instantly, then either quantum theory is incomplete, or it's pointing at something strange beneath reality. The EPR paper wasn't a disproof, it was a question wrapped in a thought experiment. A demand for clarity, a challenge to the heart of the quantum world, and it echoed for decades. The paradox lay dormant until Bell's theorem in the 1960s. John Bell proved that if local realism is true, certain statistical patterns must appear when entangled particles are measured. But if quantum mechanics is right, those patterns would be different. The two theories, Einstein's realism and quantum non-locality, make different predictions. So physicists built the tests. They fired photons through filters, measured spins, correlated outcomes, again and again. And the results? Quantum mechanics wins. The universe is spooky. Entanglement is real. Non-locality is real. The results are not random. They're linked in a way we can't fully explain. Not through wires or waves, but through shared quantum states, a kind of cosmic echo. Not causation, but correlation without cause. The two particles are not two things. They are one system, stretched across space. When you measure one, you don't change the other. You reveal something both already were, and somehow distance doesn't matter. Space blinks. But the connection holds. ER didn't kill quantum theory, it made it stronger. It forced it to evolve. Today, entanglement isn't just a curiosity, it's a resource, used in quantum cryptography, in teleportation experiments, in quantum computers. What Einstein called spooky, we now call essential. But the discomfort never left, because EPR still asks, what is real? What is separate? Where does one thing end and another begin? It's not a question about physics alone. It's a question about whether space really means what we think it does. Quantum Zeno effect. Observing something can prevent it from changing? Imagine a single unstable atom isolated in space. It is ready to decay, perhaps in a second, perhaps in 1,000 years. Quantum mechanics tells us the decay is probabilistic. It doesn't tick like a clock, it waits in possibility. But now, introduce a measurement, a probe, a way of asking, has it decayed yet? Ask it once, nothing happens. Ask it too often, and you'll notice something odd. It stops decaying altogether. The more frequently you check, the more you trap it in its current state. It cannot evolve. It cannot shift. You haven't frozen time, but you've frozen change. This is the quantum Zeno effect, a strange, verified phenomenon where constant observation inhibits transformation. It's not poetic metaphor, it's physical law. The act of looking becomes interference. Attention isn't gentle, it's an instrument, and if you wield it too often, reality responds not with clarity, but stillness. The watched atom, like Zeno's ancient arrow, refuses to move. The paradox draws its name from Zeno of Elea, who imagined an arrow in flight being motionless at every instant, always frozen in the now. Quantum physics gives his metaphor a body. At the heart of it lies the wave function, the mathematical ghost that describes all quantum states. Left alone, the wave function evolves, spreads, explores its possibilities, but measurement collapses it, reduces it to one certainty. If you wait, the wave function stretches and the particle may change, but if you observe too quickly, measure too often, you keep collapsing it back to where it started. Each measurement resets the timeline, restarting the clock on a probability that never gets a chance to unfold. The particle stays locked in place, like a dancer interrupted with every step. Each time they try to move, you tap their shoulder. Are you still there? And yes, they are. Always. Not because they want to be, but because you won't stop asking. This isn't mystical, it's mechanical, and it has been observed in labs. Ions in magnetic traps, atoms in optical lattices, systems that, when watched continuously, cease to decay. The process requires no awareness, just interaction. A machine can perform the measurement, a laser pulse, a field alignment. But each time you check, you collapse the wave function. And collapse in quantum physics is not passive. It's a hammer, a judgment. It resets probability, halts potential. In a world governed by uncertainty, measurement is finality. And when finality happens over and over again, there is no room left for change. The particle is caught in a loop of presence. Not becoming, not decaying, just persisting, because that's all it's been allowed to do. It stays alive, because you won't let it die. The quantum Zeno effect bends our intuition about time, about cause, about freedom. It shows us that the act of observing is not neutral, that in the quantum world even silence becomes a kind of noise, even stillness exerts force, and too much watching can be a kind of imprisonment. The universe unfolds probabilistically, but only when left to its own rhythms. Push it too hard for certainty, and it offers no motion at all. The paradox is elegant, unsettling. If you observe a thing often enough, you can prevent it from changing, not by freezing time, but by collapsing possibility before it can take shape. And so quantum physics whispers something Zeno could only imagine. To see a thing too often is to lock it in place. To watch without pause is to hold time hostage. Schrödinger's cat, alive and dead at once. In a sealed box, a cat lies still, next to it a vial of poison, and beside that a radioactive atom, unstable, unpredictable. If the atom decays, a sensor triggers the release of the poison. If it doesn't, the cat lives. The setup is simple, but the implications are not. Because in quantum mechanics, until we observe the atom, it is in a superposition, both decayed and not decayed. And if the atom is in both states, then so is the poison, and so is the cat. According to the logic of the quantum world, until we look inside the box, the cat is both alive and dead. Not metaphorically, not figuratively, but truly, simultaneously, in two states. Two opposing truths occupying the same space, one breath, one stillness. A paradox hidden in a box. Waiting. This is Schrödinger's cat, a thought experiment proposed by Erwin Schrödinger in 1935, not to explain quantum theory but to challenge it. He wanted to show how absurd it seems when quantum weirdness is scaled up to the macroscopic world. A particle existing in two places at once? Strange, but acceptable. A cat being both alive and dead? Intolerable. Something must break. Surely reality doesn't stretch that far, but quantum mechanics, disturbingly, doesn't flinch. The math holds. The theory insists, until a measurement is made, all possibilities remain suspended in parallel. The wave function includes them all. Observation is what collapses the superposition into a single, definite outcome. Before that moment, everything is potential. And this collapse is the true mystery. What counts as observation? Does it require consciousness? Does the universe decide a reality the moment something looks? If no one ever opens the box, does the cat remain a ghost of possibility, forever trapped between states? Schrödinger's cat isn't just about cats. It's about the boundary between the quantum and the classical. Where does uncertainty stop? When does a thing become one thing and not another? The paradox doesn't offer an answer. It asks the question so loudly that it echoes across decades of physics and philosophy. What collapses the infinite into the real? Different interpretations attempt to resolve the strangeness. In the Copenhagen interpretation, Observation collapses the wave function. The cat becomes real only when seen. In the many worlds interpretation, the cat is both alive and dead, but in separate, branching universes. No collapse, just divergence. Two realities unfolding in parallel, each with its own version of the truth. One where the cat breathes, one where it doesn't. And in some interpretations, like cubism or relational quantum mechanics, the focus shifts entirely, suggesting that what's real isn't a universal outcome, but a relationship between the observer and what is seen. Reality becomes a matter of perspective. So, is the cat alive? Is it dead? The honest answer is yes and no, and both, and neither. The cat is a symbol, a placeholder for all things uncertain, for the moments we wait for news, for the futures we can't yet name, for the times when what's true hasn't chosen a side. Schrödinger's cat isn't about physics alone, it's about existence in a state of pause, a reminder that sometimes truth doesn't come in halves, it comes in entangled contradictions, until the box is opened, and the world makes up its mind. The twin telepathy paradox. Could quantum entanglement explain psychic links? Two twins, born moments apart, grow together. Mirror images in thought, feeling, instinct. They finish each other's sentences. One feels pain, the other winces. One cries, the other stirs in sleep miles away. Stories accumulate, coincidence after coincidence. Shared dreams. Simultaneous phone calls, a sense of connection that runs deeper than chance, deeper than blood. Some call it myth, others call it mystery, but a question lingers softly beneath it all. Could something in physics, something in the strange architecture of the universe, be responsible? Could quantum entanglement, that spooky bond between distant particles, explain the quiet electricity between two human minds? Or is it just hope dressed as science? Entanglement is real. Two particles, once linked, can remain connected across great distances. Measure one, and the state of the other becomes instantly defined. No signal passes between them, no time delay. Einstein didn't like it, called it spooky action at a distance. But experiment after experiment confirms it. Photons, atoms, even molecules can become entangled. Their properties, once bound, remain tethered in a way that defies classical intuition, so the leap is tempting. If particles can be connected across space, could people? Could twins, formed from the same genetic material, grown side by side, carry some deep quantum echo? Is identity more than just memory? The paradox begins not in proof, but in pattern, the uncanny feeling that connection sometimes moves faster than words, that emotions leap gaps no voice could cross. Some theorists have speculated, half seriously, half poetically, that the brain with its billions of neurons and synapses might support quantum states, that consciousness, or parts of it, may flirt with the quantum scale. If so, and if twins were entangled in some way, physically, developmentally, could their thoughts ripple across space without sound? Could emotion collapse like a wave function, not through voice or text, but through being? Could "I miss you" arrive before it's spoken? Mainstream science holds back. The brain is warm, wet, and noisy, conditions notoriously hostile to maintaining entanglement. Decoherence happens fast. Quantum effects in the brain, if they exist at all, would be subtle and fleeting. No study has yet found evidence of brain-to-brain entanglement, no measurable link between the minds of twins, no signal stronger than chance. The stories remain anecdotal, beautiful, yes, but unverifiable. The math of quantum theory is silent on thoughts, dreams, and intuition, and yet the longing remains. the desire to believe in a universe where love, closeness, and connection are not limited by physics but rooted in it, where science could explain what soul once held. So, can quantum entanglement explain twin telepathy? Not today, maybe not ever. The laws of physics don't yet reach that far. But the paradox is not about certainty, it's about the questions we ask when logic runs out. About whether minds can echo like particles, whether human connection might be more than psychological, whether there are invisible threads we haven't yet found names for. Sometimes what feels real is more than science can answer, and leaves behind a silence that listens. Borel's paradox, the probability of selecting a specific number on a sphere. Visualize a sphere, flawless, infinite in resolution, a world with no features, no landmarks. You are asked to choose a single point on its surface completely at random. Every point is equally likely. That's the assumption. Now, someone poses a question. What's the probability that the point you randomly chose lies on the equator? It feels intuitive to say the answer is 0. The equator is a one-dimensional curve on a two-dimensional surface. It has no area. In an infinite field of choices, how could one infinitesimally thin circle hold weight? But the paradox begins when you shift your perspective. Suppose instead you define your probability by choosing a latitude first, then a longitude. In this setup, the equator suddenly matters. It gains a tiny sliver of weight, just enough to unsettle your intuition. Then flip the process. Choose longitude first, then latitude, and now the probability changes again. Same sphere, same question, different answer. This is Borel's paradox, a quiet but deep crack in the foundations of continuous probability. It shows how conditioning on a zero probability event, a line on a surface, a point in a plane, produces ambiguity. The problem isn't with the answer, it's with the question, because in probability theory, especially over continuous spaces, the outcome depends heavily on how the question is framed. Which variable is fixed first, which condition comes next? And when the condition involves a set with measure 0, something infinitesimally small, you can't treat it like ordinary probability. You can't say, given that I'm on the equator, without explaining how you arrived there. In infinite continuous spaces, randomness is not absolute, it's contextual. It unfolds based on perspective, and perspective in this case is everything. Borel's paradox doesn't deny the laws of probability, it reveals how sensitive they are to the scaffolding underneath. It's a reminder that numbers don't float freely in space. They attach to structure, to assumptions, to the coordinate systems we often forget we're using. On a perfect sphere, where every point is identical in theory, asking about the equator requires introducing a frame that wasn't there before, and that frame shapes the answer, not because the sphere changes, but because your attention does. Probability is not just a measure of chance. It is a measure of belief shaped by what you know, how you know it, and what you choose to hold fixed. In this paradox, the equator is neither empty nor privileged. It simply reflects back whatever structure you used to reach it. In the end, the sphere remains silent, but the question echoes. So, what is the probability of randomly selecting a point on the equator? There is no singular answer, only a conditional one. And that's the lesson behind Borel's soft contradiction, that in the smoothness of infinity, even randomness wears the shape of our assumptions. Gibbs's paradox. Mixing identical gases causes entropy to increase. Imagine a container divided down the center. On each side, the same gas at the same temperature, same pressure, same number of molecules. Identical in every way. Then you remove the divider. The gases mix. Nothing looks different. No color change, no pressure wave, no heat exchange. Every atom that was on the left is indistinguishable from the ones on the right. You couldn't tell the difference even if you watched every molecule. Yet when you run the numbers, when you calculate the entropy, you find it has increased. The system is more disordered. The entropy, the great bookkeeper of thermodynamic chaos, claims something irreversible has happened. But what changed? What increased when nothing was added? This is Gibbs' paradox, one of the quietest yet deepest puzzles in thermodynamics. It suggests that mixing identical gases, perfect copies of each other, somehow produces an increase in entropy, even though there is no measurable difference before or after the mixing. Entropy should only rise when the system becomes more uncertain, more complex. But if everything is the same, why does the math act as if something new has occurred? The problem doesn't lie in the equations themselves. It lies in how we count. In classical physics, every particle is treated as unique. When the partition is removed and the gases mix, every new rearrangement is considered a new state, even when the particles are fundamentally identical. But in reality, identity doesn't always matter. The resolution comes with a shift in mindset, stepping from the classical to the quantum view. In quantum mechanics, identical particles are truly indistinguishable. Swapping one helium atom with another doesn't create a new configuration, it creates the same one. The overcounting in classical thermodynamics assumes individuality where there is none. Once we correct for this, by dividing the total number of microstates by the number of indistinguishable permutations, the paradox vanishes. The entropy doesn't increase when identical gases are mixed, it stays the same. The apparent contradiction dissolves, not because entropy broke, but because our assumptions about difference did. What Gibbs exposed was not a flaw in the universe, but a flaw in how we thought it was organized. We assumed the world labeled everything. But not everything comes with a name. Gibbs' paradox teaches us that entropy isn't just about temperature and pressure. It's about knowledge, labels, and what it means to distinguish one thing from another, when two things are perfectly indistinguishable, not just visually but fundamentally. Then mixing them is meaningless. Entropy only rises when there's something real to forget. The increase is not physical, it's philosophical. A reminder that our logic must bow to the symmetries of nature. The world doesn't care for our categories unless those categories reflect something true. So, does entropy increase when identical gases mix? Only if you assume identity where none exists. Only if your math insists on difference, where the universe sees none. Arrow's impossibility theorem, no perfect voting system. Imagine a group of people, 3 or 30 or 3 million. Each has preferences. Maybe over politicians, maybe over ice cream flavors, maybe over futures. Each person ranks their choices, first to last, hoping their voice matters. And now you try to combine those preferences into one collective decision. A fair one. A rational one. You want a voting system that works, one that respects the will of the people, one that doesn't play favorites, that listens, weighs, and delivers a result that feels just. But Kenneth Arrow proved you can't have that. Not if you want it all. This is Arrow's impossibility theorem, a paradox born from pure logic. It says, if you have 3 or more choices and 2 or more voters, no rank-based voting system can satisfy all of the following conditions at once: unrestricted preference, non-dictatorship, Pareto efficiency, and independence of irrelevant alternatives. Together, these conditions seem modest, each one reasonable. Together they form a dream of fairness. But Arrow showed that this dream collapses, that no voting system can convert individual rankings into a collective one without violating at least one of those principles. Fairness, it turns out, is mathematically impossible. The implications ripple far beyond elections. This isn't just about politics, it's about group decision-making at every level, about how we build consensus, about how we trade individual desires for collective action. Arrow's theorem doesn't tell us what's right or wrong, it tells us that something must be compromised, that in any democratic system, something must give. You can avoid dictatorship, but you'll lose consistency. You can preserve individual choice, but you'll risk incoherence. You can follow the group's preferences, but only by twisting their meaning. There is no perfect system, only systems with chosen imperfections. Every vote carries hidden costs. And the paradox doesn't end with the math, it touches the psychology of governance. It asks what kind of flaws we're willing to accept. Do we want elections that are responsive or stable, transparent or efficient? Arrow shows that we can't have everything, that fairness is not a formula. It is a balancing act between contradictions. Every system you design, plurality, ranked choice, border count, Condorcet, will betray one ideal to uphold another. Democracy is not pure. It is designed compromise. So, is there a perfect voting system? Arrow's theorem says no. There are only systems that break in different ways. And the paradox is not in the math, but in our need to pretend the math doesn't matter. The paradox of tolerance. Unlimited tolerance leads to the extinction of tolerance. Imagine a society built on openness, one that prides itself on listening, allowing, forgiving. A culture that welcomes disagreement, difference, debate. It tolerates beliefs, however strange, speech, however unpopular, ideologies, however uncomfortable. Tolerance becomes its cornerstone. The promise that all voices may speak, that no idea is too dangerous to be heard. But now imagine that within this society, an intolerant force begins to rise, a group that does not believe in pluralism or diversity or peace. It exploits the freedoms offered. It spreads its message. It recruits, organizes, multiplies. And then, when strong enough, it strikes at the very system that allowed it to grow. It bans, silences, erases those who disagree. And the tolerant society, if it remains truly tolerant, lets it happen. This is the paradox of tolerance, introduced by philosopher Karl Popper in 1945. It warns that if a society extends unlimited tolerance even to those who are fundamentally intolerant, tolerance itself will be destroyed, not by war, not by erosion,